Oh, it's Ruben Luzato coming at you from Crown Heights at the brand new opening of my second store of Luzato's Meats and More here with my wife Tamar. We're here to announce that the second store we're opening is specializing in kosher delicacies, okay? Not only are you going to be able to get your mortadella, not only are you going to be able to get your gabagool, your buffalo mozzarella, but you will also be able to get the best kosher gabagool in Manhattan. I'm talking about the best. There ain't anybody who is even trying to compete with me, okay? Ruben Luzato knows how to make gabagool. He knows how to make it kosher as well, and it's delicious for you. Not only that, but we got a special every weekend, okay? Every weekend, right when you guys start your Passover or your Shabbos, I don't entirely know, but I do know you love a brisket, okay? Y'all love a brisket. It's the number one thing you guys do. You can set it and forget it, so you're not cooking over the weekend, okay? We got the best cut rate briskets sold off a Passover season that are perfect, okay, for showing up your asshole brother-in-law when you turn out to have the biggest Seder dish that their mother's ever seen, okay? Your brother-in-law's not going to be able to compete. This is going to be way more than anything he can ever bring. There's no way your mother-in-law's not going to give you that kiss on the cheek, a pinch on the other cheek. You're not even going to need to break into your rainy day fund for any of this, okay? It's cut rate, and I'm cutting it the same way that I cut those slices of meat at the original store and ship them over to Crown Heights. You get down here for opening weekend, I'll give you a brisket half off. Half off for a brisket this weekend. And first 50 people who show up, I'm inviting them over to our Seder dinner this year. You can meet me, you can meet my lovely wife Tamar, you can meet her family, you can meet them all. Only at Ruben Luzato's Meats and More, now in Crown Heights, formerly of Staten Island. Hello, and thank you for joining us in Mapping the Zone, a podcast dedicated to a highly fixated review of large, dense books, specifically the works and context of Thomas Pynchon. My name is Kate, and I'm one of the co-hosts here.
And I'm Will.
And those are going to be the only two people on this episode. Some unforeseen circumstances, scheduling came up. I know that I promised last episode that all four of us would be together again for this one, but sometimes the world works in mysterious ways, and we are just down to myself and Will. As far as I'm aware, I will be gone next week. We should be all together the week after that, I think. But Bleeding Edge is suffering from some of the same scheduling goblin issues that we had with Mason and Dixon. But that being said, we are going to be talking about chapters 25, 26, and 27 of Bleeding Edge this week. Did you have any thoughts on not just these chapters, but on any of the stuff that we've talked about in the book in the weeks that you've been gone, Will? You've been gone for a little bit now.
Well, as I think was made at least obliquely clear to listeners, I did voice a lot of my thoughts on chapters 19, 20, and 21, but that was sadly lost. So it's hard to say. But I don't have much that I think is worth going back and revisiting. Suffice to say, I think everyone else covered those sections about as well as I would have been able to contribute to bettering them. So nothing in particular.
All right. What were your thoughts on 25, 26, and 27? Your overall thoughts?
Well, I really do enjoy them, but maybe to a slightly lesser extent than the previous sets of chapters. I think that it's a lot of that kind of connective tissue again.
Yeah.
And that's it can be very fun, and it can be very insightful. But aside from really what happens in chapter 25, there's not very much in terms of like new elements.
Hmm.
And so, I enjoy reading the character driven kind of Maxine revisiting, oh, what's the specific department store from her childhood?
Loeffler's or
Dang,
Lohman's.
Lohman's, yeah. I find that very fun, and I find it very insightful in some ways, but don't, don't have a lot to to say in particular, I guess, in broad. In particular, I there's a lot to chew on, but
Sure.
in the kind of gristly way, where it might be satisfying and it might be fun, but it doesn't give you that much nutrition.
Hmm. I gotcha. Yeah, there's sort of like one thing per chapter that's kind of important in these chapters. 25, it's obviously the other DVD that she watches. 26, it's the conversation with Chandra Platt, and then 27, it's sort of the interplay between her and Horst. Now that he's back from his trip with the boys, so there's a lot of to your point, like character gristle specifically through these three chapters, especially between Maxine and Horst more than anything else. But it's sort of the kind of last couple stages before the climactic event that the book has sort of been working towards for a lot of it. But the stuff in these chapters that is effective works very, very well in a way that I enjoy reading. But you're correct in that it is mostly connective tissue between this section and the next. That being said, starting in chapter 25, Maxine gets home and she notices that there is a small bag waiting for her that has a DVD disc in it. She at first thinks that it might be a package from her kids or maybe Horst, but there's nothing to indicate who left it there, who sent it, or what it is. She notably isn't as scared to play this as the VHS tape for reasons that I'm sure Cody could explain, given his generalized anxiety around blank VHSs. But she does find that the video has a recording on it of what appears to be a group of Middle Eastern men being watched over by someone with an AR-15 as they fiddle around with a rocket launcher, a Stinger missile in particular, and point it at planes. And then when the video closes out, she immediately decides that she needs to give a call over to March Kelleher. We get a reference to the idea that maybe she can post video material on her website, or her Weblog as it's known, which is obviously, this is before YouTube was a thing, so that wasn't a given that you could just upload video anywhere, much less rip it from a disc for a digital version. She goes over to where March lives, and we get a pretty excellent quote here on page 266, where it says, March lives between Columbus and Amsterdam, a few blocks away, on a cross street that Maxine can't remember the last time she's been on, if ever. A cleaner's, an Indian place she never noticed. This old Baruka neighborhood survives, scraped and soiled, driven indoors, done with. Its original text being relentlessly overwritten. The gangs of the 50s, the drug dealing 20 years ago, all publicly fading into yup indifference as high-rise construction, free of all self-doubt, continues in its march northward. Someday, very soon, this will all be Midtown, as one by one sorrowful dark brickwork give Section 8 housing, the old miniature apartment buildings with fancy Anglo names and classical columns flanking their narrow stoops, and arched-shaped window openings and elaborate wrought iron fire escapes rapidly going to rust are demolished and bulldozed into the landfill of failing memory. Pynchon's been writing a lot about gentrification and about redevelopment through this entire book, and this is just another example of that, but is certainly one of the most beautifully written passages on it, in my opinion, and is also just very true if you live in an area that's gentrifying. The buildings that get torn down for the luxury condos or high-rises or apartment buildings are just so much more interesting than what they put up in their place. As someone who lives in a rapidly gentrifying city and who just visited Portland, there is no difference between what they look like here and what they look like on the West Coast. It's just, they're all very cookie cutter. They're all very boring, modern, building layouts, and all seem to advertise themselves in the same way, in very depressing facet of modern life. But it all kind of started in New York. This is sort of the beginning of of where this kind of template began.
Yeah, and that particular passage I think is interesting because I don't know if there has been an earlier passage in this book that is actually, kind of a peek behind the curtain into, you know, post 2005 maybe New York City,
Mhm.
that hasn't been mediated through, either some kind of like what was like a pre-Gnostician. What was the name? The person who could smell the future. That kind of like fortune
Oh,
telling
right. Yeah.
sort of, actually framing it. This is just the narrator, which, my interpretation is Maxine's kind of view,
Mhm.
actually getting a peek into the future directly, which is
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, 100%. Um, do you have any thoughts on the videotape at all that she watches and then goes to March's place and has her watch?
Well, I think it is fascinatingly specific and yet vague because yeah, we are made to believe, and it in all likelihood was Reg Despard shooting it, but we don't actually have confirmation of that beyond the style of like hyper zooming,
Right.
which in itself is contradicted with being framed as a return to his old ways of
Mhm.
cinematography. So it might be all mocked up in that kind of way. But there are so many details that lend a sort of reality to it. But as the chapter goes on, they discuss it could be made up. It could have been a staged, some kind of threat or just some kind of, noise to
Right.
throw off, not necessarily Maxine in particular, but whoever it is that is investigating whatever is going on around 9/11.
Yeah,
And
and
yeah,
well, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and it's impressive in that kind of dichotomy.
Right. And this is where it gets to my personal theory about wind dust and what he's up to in this book. I talked about this specifically in the chunk of chapters where Maxine has a dream about him. I don't remember exactly what chapter it is. I think it might be 15, 16, or 17 that happens in. And I go into my entire theory in there, but another detail of it is that he's living out of his suitcase when or briefcase rather, when we last see him. That the nature of the video is effectively wind dust trying to bait Maxine into releasing something that can disrupt the 9/11 plot is sort of the guess that I have as it relates to this. That he figured out what was happening. He uncovered the 9/11 sort of scheme or conspiracy and couldn't stomach what that would mean. He's a guy who's perfectly comfortable with doing horrible things in South America, but doing those same things on U.S. soil he can't stand for. So tries to get it stopped, can't do it. Shoots this kind of video of this group of people potentially going to shooting down a plane of some kind, and then just sort of dead drops it at Maxie's door in hopes that she'll put it online. It'll get picked up by somebody, and then if you draw a bunch of attention to the idea that somebody somewhere is going to do something with a plane in New York, that maybe this can't go forward as he figured out it was going to. And so at this point, he's kind of working for himself almost in a protection scheme for the country that he believes in or that he was doing something for in South America. And if that sort of facade crumbles, then everything he was doing down there really amounted to nothing at all. And it was just in service of this kind of evil regime. So that's sort of the interpretation that I have as it relates to it. I think that Windust's eventual disappearance from the narrative is just that they found him and killed him, and that they killed him for making this video in particular. Um, so that's sort of the thing that I come away from with this. There's not necessarily textual support that I can remember to point towards that, but that's sort of the through line with Windust that I feel like you can follow through his appearances in the book, and then eventually this aspect of the narrative.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I agree that, I haven't read the book as many times as you have. I'm not sure if I agree with your characterization of Windust, but I do think that this particular fragment of the book is very hard to situate as anything other than a sort of double bluff in the way that you're framing it.
Hmm.
Because really, any other angle, I mean, it falls apart. At best, you have what Reg Despard accidentally finding himself in like a weird counter-terrorist operation in the off chance that like one of the 9/11 hijackers decides to renege.
Right. Yeah.
Like that is almost crazier.
Yeah. No, 100% it would be. And I think that the kind of connection here that puts it together for me to some degree with Nicholas Windust is that um, the cologne that he wears is the same cologne that's present at the crime scene where the earlier assassination took place, and that video was shot in the same place that the killing took place. So almost as if Windust went there to go shoot this video because the building was owned by Gabriel Ice, at least in portion. So then they're going to go to the owners as far as an investigatory perspective, and then maybe that's how they can uncover all this stuff. Lester happens to be there for some reason. I'll never really have an answer to that, and that Windust ends up killing him to protect what they're doing, so it can't get thrown out there to the public. That's kind of the connection that I see between Windust and this whole thing. Is that the video was shot because there is a date on the video that Maxine takes notice of, but as March mentions, that can be faked. But if it is true, then that probably would have been around the time that Lester would have been killed at the Deseret as well.
Yeah, and I'm struggling to recall specifically what we find of Reg in the last few, the next 10, 20 chapters of this book. But I mean, I think there's probably a valid reading of this novel where even he is a controlled asset and everything he's fed Maxine has been an act.
Right.
And I think that you have to start thinking in that realm of like everything being a concerted conspiracy against Maxine Tarnow in particular to really get around that interpretation of this video.
Yeah, I would agree. And that brings us to the fact that March also knows Reg, because Maxine mentions that that's who she thinks shot it. It turns out that that March met Reg during. It says here, "Oh, I remember Reg. We met during the blizzard of '96 down at the World Trade Center." This is referring to the 1996 janitor strike. This is a real piece of history. For 4 weeks, basically all across the country, janitors went on strike to protest a new lower pay rate for any newly hired workers in the union, was essentially what they were striking over. It was quite a big deal. There are a lot of news articles that you can read about it. I couldn't find anything to relate to the like conspiracy aspects that March seems to mention were present, as far as like shadowy payoffs or anything like that. But it was a very real piece of American history that she's referring to there.
Yeah, and at this point, to step forward, I guess, a little bit past that specific moment in the scene. But at this point is when I really, crystallized in my belief that while March may not be like some controlled asset who's feeding false information to the counterculture as it whatever may remain of a counterculture that is following her blog online. But it is clear in this scene and, in hindsight, the rest of her scenes up to this point, that she is far too biased and far too rigid in her understanding of the world to be a useful investigator of these things. Because you really do see the distinction between Maxine as somebody who is able to revise her previous assumptions and contrast that with how March is framing everything in terms of like, the specific line about Bush's ass.
Sure. Yeah.
Like really everything for her boils down to like, oh, the big bad. And, I'm sure that, obviously she's not stupid, but she has a very rigid worldview. And I think it's very hard to in the framework of this book, look at that kind of a character and view her as anything other than um, a false oracle, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, which is especially sad because you get the impression that she believes that she's the old woman from her parable. Like she herself doesn't seem to have that understanding that she may be a false oracle, and that her inability to kind of change her mind or to change her worldview in the way that Maxine is able to is it really changes or could change the interpretation of that parable that she delivers to the children, and that the woman's resistance to any sort of bribe or payoff or anything, while seemingly principled at first, may actually be representative of something else.
Yeah, and it's not even as though I think that like any of March's particular beliefs that make up her worldview are wrong. It's more that just you can't go through life thinking that you are the paradigm of purity,
Right.
morally
Yeah.
speaking, and
Yep.
also be able to see anything clearly.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. There's that is ultimately a filter that you are applying to yourself, which robs you of the ability to see things for what they are in a lot of cases, especially when it comes to changing your mind about something.
Yeah, and it's not like Maxine at the end of this book has a clear view of anything that's happened, but it does seem like she might have had a better shot at it than March.
Or at the very least is willing to accept whatever the truth may have been, as opposed to forcing through something else.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, which brings up an interesting conversation as far as a standpoint of March versus Oedipa. Because you don't necessarily get the sense from Oedipa that she would be in the same basket, or sorry, Maxine versus Oedipa, that she'd be in the same basket as Maxine. It seems like whatever happens after that Locke gets called out, she's likely not going to find any substantive answers and is going to continue to follow down this quest that is going to be resistant to any sort of explanation, given that she's hoping for the ultimate explanation simply by who's buying the stamps.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a question of, especially once we're talking about a book that was written 50 years after the other,
Right.
how much of Pynchon's distaste for Lot 49 comes from recognizing that kind of fool's errand aspect of Oedipa as a symbol. How
Mhm.
much of it comes from that being an intentional aspect of Oedipa as a symbol? How much of it, all of these things, it becomes kind of like a felted mess of threads that you can pull at, but you can't really discern it. But it's still interesting to think about.
Yeah, definitely. After they have a conversation. Oh, I don't wanna move on past March without mentioning her shoes that she's wearing when she opens the door. She's wearing novelty slippers, each shaped like a shark, with sound chips in the heels, so that when she walks around, they play the opening of the Jaws theme. And then Maxine says, "Where can I find these? Price is no object. I can write them off." I It's very funny, but I feel like that would drive me nuts really quick if every single time I took a step, the Jaws opening theme would start from the beginning, presumptuously. That it doesn't just stack plays in order of how many steps you've taken. It just starts over and over and over again.
Yeah, hopefully it's not like those old school singing birthday cards where literally you can open it a dozen times in a second and it just plays the same thing at the exact same time.
Right, yeah.
But then the question becomes: is each one just playing the one note, and you have to increase your pace? Are these somehow synchronized slippers?
That would be pretty impressive. Maybe that's why Maxine wanted a pair, is they did manage to synchronize up the sounds in the slippers.
I have to assume that's what it is. And when people
Yeah,
talk about Pynchon as a sci-fi author, I think they really not overestimate. They really overlook these kinds of small details that are really
exactly.
the dream of 1950s sci-fi.
Yeah, it's like when Ray Bradbury invented keyless entry in Fahrenheit 451.
This is the future we deserve.
Exactly. Shark slippers with Jaws sound chips. The two of them decide to go up to the roof of the Deseret, and once they get up there, they find a piece of the Stinger missile. But before they find that, they see that there is a crew of workers installing something on the roof, and a group of people protesting it. And it turns out that there is somebody from the Tenants Association named Beverly there who March knows. And so the two of them decide to join into this protest, and it's explained as scumbag co-op board again, went behind everyone's back, leased some space up here to a cellular phone outfit. These guys, indicating the work crew, are trying to put in microwave antennas to irradiate the neighborhood. Somebody doesn't stop them, we're all going to end up with glow-in-the-dark brains. And then we get the discovery of the piece of the Stinger missile that Maxine decides might be a good idea to bring to Igor. Any thoughts in particular on this whole cell phone company leasing scheme and what it might be related to? Is this a cover for the video that was shot there for them to investigate it? Is it just something that's actually happening? Is Pynchon making a comment on telecommunications? Anything like that come to mind?
Well, as always, I'm going to bring what I like to think of as the most ridiculously galaxy brain interpretation, where I see this as coincidence. That they are just people also protesting, and there is just a cell tower going on the roof. And this is one of those many situations where there are normal things happening that people are ascribing false motivations to. And it can, you can pull those things together and be like, well, that means that 9/11 was a false flag. Or you can pull it together and say, well, this means that 9/11 was the thing which all of these other small parts are distracting people like Maxine from, in order to prevent the prevention of these bigger machinations. And so I guess my interpretation is that this is an obfuscation that is also an icon of obfuscation, I guess.
Yeah. I think that's probably the best interpretation of it that I come up with, for sure. They decide to leave. Maxine brings this piece of the Stinger missile to Igor. They take a meeting in the Zill, as it says at the beginning of the next page break, and we figure out that it is a portion of the coolant receptacle cap, or battery coolant receptacle cap. Not just that, but the writing on there. He says, or does it? No, he doesn't tell her what it is. Is it Chandler that tells her what the translation of it is?
I do think it's Chandler, maybe. Yeah. Not here for sure.
Yeah, but what Igor does say is, me and my friends, nothing personal. After Afghanistan, Stingers stayed there with the Mujahideen. They went on the black market. Many got bought back by the CIA. I arranged a few deals. CIA didn't really care how much they spent. You get up to $150,000 a pop. That was a long time ago, Maxine says. Are there any of them still around? Plenty. Worldwide, maybe 60, 70,000 units plus the Chinese knockoffs. Not so much in the US, which makes this one interesting. Mind my asking where you could find it? And then she shows him the video after that. That particular quote feels relevant because, there's some real life truth to that, and that equipment was just left all over Afghanistan for the Mujahideen to be equipped with, which then they used against the US. But if the CIA is buying these Stinger missiles back from Igor or from anyone else, that could very easily explain how one ended up in this video, if my theory about it is true, that this is something Windust had from a purchase made against the black market to get one of these back in the United States, and he's now utilizing it for this video he's getting recorded. Igor is shown the video, and or no, he does give her the translation. He says it's Pashto for God is great, which is quite fascinating for them to put on on a rocket launcher piece of equipment. But after he explains where
Oh yeah,
it's on
I
page
couldn't find that for
273.
some reason.
I couldn't either, and I had it underlined.
Wonderful.
But especially after that, he says Pashto for God is great, maybe legit, maybe CIA forgery to look like Mujahideen covering up some caper of their own. Again, I'm operating with the estimation that is exactly what it is. And then she decides to ask him about the ballistic knife that Lester was killed with. And Igor pretty much says that it's much like this rocket launcher, this Stinger missile. It is just a way to make it appear as though the Russians were involved rather than anything else, which was exactly what was put out there as a theory by the Nose himself, I believe, back when they investigated the area in the first place, or potentially it was March who said that might have been what was going on. Any thoughts from chapter 25 other than that?
Well, I just wanted to, well, a couple of things, but first,
Yeah.
I agree with your interpretation that it's more likely to be the CIA making up a fake Islamist missile, because just based on vibes, I'm not claiming to be any kind of scholar of Wahhabism.
Yeah.
I just kind of get the sense that they would write that kind of thing on the missile itself and not
Right.
on the part of the payload that has very little to do with the actual explosive.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, I mean it just feels right. You put you put the name on the bullet. You don't put the name on the casing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, unless you want the casing to be found somewhere, and then suddenly people have a suspect to work with.
Which is an excellent device for a book, but not
Yeah,
great
right.
for actual vendetta reasons. But beyond that, I really love the details of how Reg and Igor knew each other at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Because the situation that Reg is being hired for, where he's just filming babies doing normal baby things to prove that these children are not like dummies or like drugged out of their minds or something,
Right. Yeah.
is just it's a fun way to play with the symbols of the whole, like, oh, this is shot like Reg, or oh, this has God is great written on it in Pashto. It's a very much along the same lines in a much more funny and kind of grim way.
Yeah. No, it
Yeah.
definitely is.
And going further, all of the specific line of great appreciation for Russian cinema. Always a Gorbushka market buying up kilos of DVDs, Piratstvo, of course, but no Hollywood movies, only Russian. Tarkovsky, Tsiga Vertov, Lady with Little Dog, not to mention greatest animated film ever made, Yoshik Vitumane. Which all of those are real people, or not, real people or real films that
Mm-hmm.
are held in great esteem. And the funny part in the normal Pinchonian way of mixing up a real symbol with just hanging reference
Yeah.
is that none of those none of those movies are like entirely Russian things. And
Right. Yeah, they're all pretty accessible.
well, no, but also just like Tarkovsky was Hungarian, Ziga Vertov is Polish, Lady with Little Dog was, originally written by Chekhov and then adapted by, I want to say, a Belarusian director and writer.
Mhm.
And Yožik Vitumane is like, I mean, it's an animated film, so there are various people. The director's Russian, but a lot of the other people are not Russian. A lot of them are Polish or Ukrainian. And I don't know if there's anything to pull from that other than just the inherent hypocrisy of the kinds of people who go around, and Igor's not necessarily one of them, but just the kind of people who go around talking about Hollywood being a machine built by imperialist capitalist pigs, and then praising these Russian films that are actually, diffuse cultures that are all Slavic and all related to Russia. But probably, if it weren't for the structure of the USSR, probably wouldn't be identified as Russian films.
Right. Well, I mean, it probably does also seek to tell you what Igor's concept of Russia is from a standpoint of he seems to believe in the USSR borders just like Putin does in regards to what he's willing to consider Russian or not Russian.
Oh, sorry, I was very wrong. Tarkovsky is Russian. It was Russian. I got him mixed up.
Oh, okay.
No clue how he would have identified himself. But,
He probably would have had a very long answer for you
hopefully,
if
I
his
wouldn't.
films are anything to go off of.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect anything less.
They're very good though. If you haven't watched any Tarkovsky films, I'd highly recommend them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Ivan's Childhood, Solaris, Stalker. There's a lot of really good stuff to love in his filmography. Yeah, good points all around. I mean, it also does your point about Reg. Also gets to your earlier point that he is suspiciously around a lot from a standpoint of all of these different elements of not just counterculture, but intergovernmental cooperation or in this case adoption efforts, which is interesting to say the least.
Yeah, and it could absolutely just be that, the same kinds of government operatives who are working with hash slingers would also happen to know Reg and therefore refer them. Or, Igor being this underworld guy who is clearly connected with, the former Soviet uh, command structure. There are totally, completely non-sinister ways that these people could all be connected. But
Yeah,
the
true.
ambiguity's there.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I did forget to mention the other funny part in chapter 25 in Maxine pretending to turn March's face like a copy of the Washington Post when she makes a reference to Woodward and Bernstein. Which I'm very curious just like what that would look like. Like if someone was miming my face as a newspaper. I just don't know how that would look.
Well, first they would dig their fingernails under your facial skin.
Yeah. That sounds unpleasant. They're actually going to turn my flesh like a page.
Gotta believe in verisimilitude, even in
absolutely,
even in clearly telegraphed miming.
Yes. Starting at chapter 6, we get a follow up on the earlier plot from when Maxine went out with the streetlight people to the karaoke bar, and that Cornelia rings up and, as previously threatened, wants to go shopping. Maxine is expecting Bergdorf's or Saks, but instead Cornelia hustles her into a cab, and next thing she knows, they're headed for the Bronx. I've always wanted to shop at Loehmann's, Cornelia explains. But they never let you in because you have to be accompanied by somebody Jewish? I'm offending you? Nothing personal. Little history is all you realize. I hope that you know it's not the Loehmanns of legend. That one moved back in, I don't know, the late 80s. I love this segment for a couple of reasons. One, because I have experienced this kind of, I don't want to call it anti-Semitism, but there are some people who get very interested in cultures that are not their own in a way that is over earnest and potentially makes you feel like you're being reduced just to your ethnicity. It's a very real thing, and this is a good depiction of it as far as how it usually plays out.
Yeah, as like a one-off instance,
Yeah.
you could totally just call it benevolent racism or some more specific form of that. I would say that Cornelia's done enough of these things that it does maybe rise to the level of at least harboring some anti-Semitic beliefs, because
Yeah.
there's an innocent degree of this kind of stuff, but when it's when you have 4 conversations with somebody and 3 times they bring up some very straightforwardly discriminatory bigoted assumptions about you or the culture that you're from. Yeah,
Right, yeah.
a
Well, and
bit much.
it's obvious too that Maxine like thought it was just maybe a harmless joke when she first met Cornelia in the bathroom when they were talking about shopping, and they do the exchange of like sometimes I've even paid retail. Like I think it's
Yeah.
smart of Pynchon to like start there, and then in this scene when she just wants to go to a Jewish department store, that Maxine just like leaves and goes to a gun range and is like, I'll be back once she's probably done.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not like she's saying, I've never been to Loman's. I keep meaning to go there. Let's check that place out. But that's
Yeah.
not how she's framed it. She has
No.
framed it as though there's something that has stopped her.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the fact that I'm not Jewish. Loman's is a real department store for those who don't know. It existed from 1921 to 2018. They shifted to being an online only store from 2012 to 2018 or 2016 and 2018. I can't remember from the research I did. The store was founded by a woman named Frida Lohman. What she would do is she would buy seasonal overstock from designer brands and then sell it at bargain prices in her store. Eventually, her store became so popular that she actually bought the building that it was in, and she lived upstairs. Um, she always refused to franchise or to create more than one location of Loman's, but her son opened a second store on Fordham in the Bronx, which is the one that they make a reference to in the book here. So if you're wondering why Maxine is saying like, well, it's not exactly the Lomans of old, that's why they're going to the son's location, not the mother's location. Um, and unfortunately, after she died, her son then took the company public in 1962. And at its peak, they had over 100 stores in um, 17 states. So really, there's an element of tragedy there, and that her son just did not keep her wishes and decided to do what he was going to with the business.
Yeah, it does have kind of a congruous shape to all of the discussion of gentrification in general throughout the book. Is that
Yeah,
kind of, just taking the name and leaving behind all of the reasons that anyone would have actually gone to Lomas.
yeah, absolutely true. It's a real shame, and that gets more so into where they go after Lomans, which we'll get to shortly here. But Cornelio walks in and immediately goes, "Oh, Maxie, I love it!" Like she's just enraptured by what a store that, to hear it described, looks kind of like a TJ Maxx from a standpoint of just aisles of clothes on on hangers, and then the back room is, or the old back room is where they have the designer stuff. There doesn't seem to be much to be enraptured by. If you look at photos of Lomans, especially from the original era, it's pretty nondescript, if not maybe a little bit messy. Maxine agrees to meet her at 1 back at the registers and decides that she's going to leave. And instead, she goes to a gun range that is called Sensibility, which what a name for a gun range to be called. And Maxine shoots at her favorite kind of target, which is the Thug. This one is rendered in fuchsia and optic yellow green. So she's shooting at what appears to be the Hulk. Is what I feel like Pynchon is describing there.
Yeah, I mean it's his favorite pair of colors again, but it's very hard to imagine like an act like because he goes on to describe he has the look of an aging juvenile delinquent with one of those shiny high 50s haircuts, a scowl, and possibly nearsighted squint. Like, if you've ever been to a shooting range, you've basically seen that profile.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
how you apply lime green and magenta to that is hard to imagine, honestly. Is it like the hot points, the target spots of his mid chest and face are magenta or green, and the rest is the other? I don't know. It's
Right.
genuinely weird to imagine because it's either like a tie dye thing or it is the weirdest heat map I've ever heard of.
I honestly didn't recognize before we started doing the show that Pinchon had a favorite set of colors, and it was fuchsia and lime green. I had no idea.
Well, frankly, I said it was his favorite. I don't know it. Like I
It comes up
complained
enough that I
about.
think you're correct.
Well, like I complained about at the end of Mason and Dixon, it could be his favorite or it could be his least favorite. It's used so specifically that it's very hard to tell whether he's just like trying to put his favorite colors where he can, or if
Mhm.
he's trying to like use them as a symbol of something in a very obscure way.
Yeah, it's one of the things that now that we've been doing the show for as long as we have, for as many of his books as we have, that if I ever had a chance to have a conversation with him, I would bring that up. I'd be like, "What's with the fuchsia and the lime green? What's going on there? You don't need to explain anything else to me. I just need to know what that's about."
Yeah, if it had just been contained to like Gravity's Rainbow or Vineland, or the two of them, it would be a lot easier to come up with an easy explanation. But at this point,
Right.
it's just why? Because it does show
Oh,
up again later in these chapters.
yeah. It's got to be something, or it is as simple as just his favorite colors. Which maybe if you walked into his house and you looked in his closet where he keeps his jackets, you'd be able to tell that it was his favorite color.
I honestly would hope not, for his own sake.
I don't know. He seems like he's probably pretty happy. He's lived a long time. I feel like you can't be that angry and live until you're almost 90.
I just feel like if you're walking around in lime green and fuchsia, you're gonna get figured out as Thomas Pynchon far earlier than it seems like he was.
Oh, I feel like maybe it could be a bait and switch thing where you'd assume that it wouldn't be him because he's drawing too much attention to himself about what he's wearing.
Well, yeah, exactly, like the Simpsons scene with his house with the lime
Right. Yeah,
signs. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
just that. I mean, it could totally be that. Just walking around in the worst pinstripe suit of all time.
Quick, somebody go back to that CNN video for the release of Mason and Dixon where he's in the frame somewhere and see if there's anyone wearing outlandish clothing that may or may not be fuchsia and lime green. Maybe we've cracked the code here on mapping this out. As she's about to leave the shooting range, she runs into, as it says, her partner in wine theft, Randy, um, from back in the chapter where they broke into Gabriel Hayes' house. We learn that Randy has had his access to the house pulled, and that there's been all sorts of weird stuff going on out there. References to UFOs and strange lights and weird people coming to sort of ogle at the area. We also we also figure out that a couple of the people eloped out to Winchester Willie in particular has eloped out to Utah, where maybe has gotten married to multiple women, or that the thruple got married. And this is where you get what is basically a Mormon joke, where Maxine says it's illegal for people to be married to multiple people in Utah, and then uh, Randy just says probably not, but you know how it is. It just seems like it's an elaborate joke about the fact that there's a lot of Mormons in Utah.
Well, so then remind me now, Kate. Have you read Against the Day?
I have not. No.
Okay, so I will leave it threadbare then. But this is a fairly this type of two men and a woman relationship is fairly central to that book.
Oh, okay.
And so you do have to wonder if, either as a joke on the reader or as a sincere attempt at symbolism, whether we're supposed to relate, Bruno Shea and Westchester Willie to those characters or not.
Oh, that would make more sense.
Well, I'm not sure it would.
I mean, it
But
would at least there would be
yeah.
some additional, motivation for its inclusion.
Yeah, I mean, you could also drag it over to, Gravity's Rainbow and, compare it to Blicero, uh, Gottfried, and Katya if you
Yeah,
really want to do that. But
true.
I don't want to do that. I hope the best for the three of them. Westchester, Willie, Bruno, and Shay.
Yeah, with their triple sink vanity, their his, and hers bath ensemble. My favorite one in here is the 30-piece set of cookware.
It's a great bit because that's totally reasonable. It's also the least
Yeah.
likely because
Yeah.
you just don't need that many sets of forks.
No. No, you don't. Um, so after they part, Maxine goes back to Loman's, and there's a great quote here on 277 if you want to read it that says she arrives back at Loman's.
She arrives back at Loman's just about the time Cornelia resurfaces from the crowds of women in the back room who've been molesting racks of discount clothing, squinting doubtfully at designer labels, seeking advice by way of cellular phone from their size 0 teenage daughters. Maxine recognizes in Cornelia signs of advanced DITS, or discount inventory tag stupor. It is both a really accurate description of like what it's like to be in a department store
Yeah,
for
it
too
is.
long, and
Yep.
also very funny.
Yeah, 100%. And I love the specific aspect of squinting squinting doubtfully at the designer tags as if they don't believe it, which is something I've seen people do. It's a capture of very real life.
Well, and it goes back to kind of your comparison to TJ Maxx or whatever,
Yeah, exactly.
where it could totally be a knockoff in that context, but seriously, at this point in like the year 2000, Loman's is not a discount store
No,
in any real
it's
sense.
it's been turned into its own brand against the will of the founder.
Yeah.
As if to make your gentrification point even clearer to the reader, after that, the two of them decide to go find something to eat, and there's a wonderful quote in here that says, "Back in the old Fordham Road era, as she recalls, you could at least find a decent knish in the neighborhood, a classic egg cream. Around here, there's a Domino's Pizza and a McDonald's and possibly make-believe Jewish delicatessen, bagels and blintzes, which is, of course, where Cornelia simply must do lunch, having heard of it, no doubt, from some junior league newsletter, and where they are presently in a booth surrounded by a dumpster load of Cornelia's purchases, which impulsive is too kind of a word for." um, it first of all, it's very funny, but it's also very accurate. I think it might be the most accurate description of what living in a gentrified area is like, or at least living in an area that is gentrifying is like. It, it's of a lot of books where this has been a theme in it. I don't think that any of the other books I've read have so adequately captured that feeling in such a small chunk. You know, when gentrification begins to happen somewhere, suddenly there's all these new developments going up, condos, apartments, high-rise buildings. Suddenly new room has been made for all of this stuff, taking away, typically the charm or the uniqueness of the neighborhood that used to be there. And then, with that goes away the affordable properties, with that goes away the single family housing in a lot of cases. And afterwards, there's almost always this weird influx of like very standardized fast food places, like what Maxine is talking about with Domino's and all of that. And then on top of that, these other development groups that are now operating in the area, they don't just build condos and everything like that, but they also welcome in like restaurant groups to come in, and they build new restaurants that have like elevated food that's an homage to the neighborhood that you're in or anything like that. And I wrote a whole thing in my notes about a restaurant group where I live that does this because it's very real. Like specifically the example of what is possibly a make-believe Jewish delicatessen is just such a perfect encapsulation of that. Of like, we've cleared out the actual stuff in this neighborhood because none of them can afford to operate here anymore, or we bought them out of their property, and now CGC Restaurant Incorporated is going to be putting up this elevated Jewish delicatessen that serves Jewish food, but it's not made by Jewish people, and it's not the same recipes for the last 100 years that made this neighborhood interesting, that made people move here in the first place. It's just sort of an imitation of that, which of course gets into the rest of the interaction with Maxine Cornelia at this place. But the other aspect of it that really hits me is the fact that she got the idea of going to this place from like some junior league newsletter, because that's always part of it too. Is like, eater.com is like a spawn of Satan for restaurant tourism in these places. And just there are the true newsletters that do get sent out in a lot of places like this, where people use phrases like, "Oh, well, you have to go here." And in the modern era, it seems like that is almost always referring to one of these kind of faux restaurants or sort of nouveau riche restaurants. And in the further modern era than when the book was published, a lot of that stuff has been getting packaged into just like, that's what everybody should eat now, instead of it being like an actual like fancy restaurant that you maybe go to once on a a special occasion. It's becoming weirdly ubiquitous as far as like, if you go out to eat, it's to one of these elevated places, which means that none of them really are. I don't know. This one particular quote spawned a lot of thoughts in my head because of where I've moved to now.
Oh, it's not just you. I mean, I don't have quite the same experience in those contexts. But the specific choice of a decent knish and a classic egg cream as contrasted to bagel and blintz, where, yeah, there are specific New York Jewish bagel recipes, but the bagel seems a lot easier to mimic than a knish, like a good bagel. Seems easier to counterfeit than a good knish.
Right.
And both of those are foods where, like, okay, an egg cream sounds gross just because of its name, but then once you actually learn what an egg cream is,
They're very good.
I've enjoyed an egg cream,
Yeah.
but I understand why people hear about what it is and kind of recoil, because it is a bit weird. But like a knish is, it's one of those things where like you don't know what's in it until you bite into it, and you have to trust the person that's gonna be what it is. Whereas a bagel is a bagel. It has the things that are on the surface, and then it's just bread. And a knish, sure, it is a filled thing, but you do see what it is usually. And that leads me to just my own esoteric symbolism of American culture. That uh, I think that pies, whether it's a knish or any other kind of savory pie, is the target of exactly these cultural forces, and one of the first things to fall. And I think you can tie it all the way back to the temperance movement and the fact that pies, because people didn't have ovens, you could make a pie in like a dish and fill it with liquor so that it wouldn't spoil. I think the American cuisine has really suffered since we left behind putting a bunch of offal into a pie crust and letting that sit on the counter for weeks at a time.
It's all been downhill from there.
Exactly. And things like knishes have also just they've suffered the same fate for no good reason. That's my personal bugbear.
Yeah, that's fair. So you want our cuisine to be a bit more British.
Well, I think the British, because of their general cultural conservatism, have been able to resist that kind of thing a little longer. But
I see.
yeah. I think in particular, I think that meat pies, etc., should never have left the American diet.
I agree. Meat pies are delicious.
People these days, they hear mincemeat pie and they think of essentially a grape or a currant pie, which is just weird.
Yeah, and can't be that good.
I'm a fan, but I mean, they're not as good as they should be. It's just, beef
It's not a
tallow
pork
tastes
pie.
good. Exactly. It's not steak and kidney.
Exactly. Yeah, we're on the same page on that. Well,
Yeah.
this goes on for the rest of their conversation at the restaurant, where Cornelia needs to have Jewish rye bread for her turkey pastrami roast beef combo, and then when they bring it to her, she needs to make sure that it's Jewish rye bread by asking. The absurdity of this, I'll ask it, hello, holding the sandwich up to her face, you're Jewish? The customer wants to know before she eats you. What? No, she's Goyishi. But they don't have kosher, so maybe this pick is what they do instead. The fact that Maxine is like openly making fun of her, and yet she's still just like singularly focused on not just going to a Jewish place, but I need my bread to be Jewish. When they bring her Dr. Brown's Celery, which was a popular drink in Jewish delicatessens, Maxine says it's Jewish champagne, and then she responds as if it's actually Jewish champagne. Like the level of absurdity here in the anti-Semitism is it rises to the comedic for sure.
Yeah, and I really do. I mean, this is one of those moments where you really appreciate Pynchon as a studier of humanity,
Mhm.
because the specific line of "Shh," goes Maxine, though Linda, recognizing Wasp's jocularity here, ignores. I mean, yeah, that is exactly coming from a long line of people who like to think of themselves as wasps.
Hmm.
Um, that 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 is the kind of joke they those petty bourgeois people make all the time.
Mhm.
And it can be very funny. In this case, it sounds insane because she's also the person asking if the rye bread is Jewish rye bread.
Right.
But it's a really nice touch because that is the way that that kind of person would de-escalate the situation. A completely useless effort, but
Yeah, most
good
certainly.
for Linda for developing such a thick callus because this would be maddening.
Yeah, 100% it would be. We learned some more about the relationship between Rocky and Cornelia in particular, a bit of their backstory, where they seem to love each other almost in spite of each other. Like it's a very weird dynamic that the two of them have. That's described in these paragraphs. Did you have any thoughts on their marriage?
No, not really. I mean, I maybe I just skimmed too much over it, but I
Hmm.
read it a lot as just a really sweet little window into these absolute maniacs,
Yeah, they're
and
crazy people.
they're like deeply disturbed people,
Yeah.
who very much self-hating in both cases, and also incredibly hostile to everyone else while preserving that very like almost culturally supremacist ideal of
Hmm.
themselves, and it's really sweet to see to have a window into them just being kind to each other.
Right. Even though they entered into this marriage for terrible reasons, as it's
Exactly. Yeah.
described. Yeah, it's and I do think that there is certainly a sweetness by the time that like and I think it's interesting that for the two of them it's almost like they're the only two people that they've been able to see through their prejudiced opinions of the people group they represent, which especially coming from this sort of exchange in the Jewish delicatessen. Like she wanted to get married to him just because she wanted the stereotypical Italian man. He wanted to get married to her because he wanted the stereotypical like money and power of a wasp person. And then neither of them were quite that. But then they still found a way to kind of either look past those opinions or to see that there's another person beneath there. And that seems to be the only time that they've ever been willing to do that, even for themselves, to your point. Like they're both very self-loathing and they both exercise an absurd degree of investment in the stereotypes of their culture, and they seem to only reserve judgment for everyone but each other, which is very interesting from a dynamic perspective.
Yeah, it's it's very Pinchonian in having Rocky's family be a bunch of essentially like the stereotype of a wasp household in terms
Mhm.
of how they relate to each other. It's very Pinchonian, but it's also a really kind of sweet look into the two characters' psychologies, where they do actually relate to one another in this very disturbing way.
Right. No one can write a dysfunctional relationship quite like Pinchon.
Well, because if you write it more realistically, it's way too dark.
Yep, that's for sure. Um, the song that Rocky sings, "Donna non vidi mai," translates to "I've never seen a woman like this." So It's a real song that you can listen to. It's also in this conversation where Cornelia recommends that Maxine go see Chandler Platt about her issue, which I don't I don't know if there's been a more waspy name than Chandler Platt. Maybe Tucker Swanson McNeil or Carlson, but from a standpoint of if you had to come up with a wasp name, you couldn't do much better than something like Chandler Platt.
No, it's absolutely up there.
Yeah, it's wild. She also says that he has a genius for facilitating outcomes, which really provides a clear explanation of the fact that he is of the controlling class of the wasp apparatus that I kind of described at the outset of our read of this book. And we've got a really good quote here on 280 that says, which sets off a game show buzzer, actually, for if Maxine's not mistaken, she's already run into this Platt customer, a financial community big shot and fixer of some repute with upper echelon access, and what strikes her as a sense, finely calibrated as an artillery map, of where his best interests lie. Over the years, they've met at various functions at the junction between East Side Largesse and West Side Guilt, and as it's coming back to her now, Chandler may even once have grabbed her tit briefly. More of a reflex than anything, some cloakroom situation, no harm, no foul. He doubts he even remembers. Well, there are fixers and fixers. I love that line of finely calibrated as an artillery map of where his best interests lie. It's just such a perfect descriptor for the kind of man that he is and the power that he wields and how that, is sort of put out into the world. It's just very well done.
Yeah, and it's a really good, this whole section is a really, I think, a strong indication of how Pynchon as an author developed post his, what many people would say is his peak as a writer with books like Gravity's Rainbow. Because, you have this very clear alignment of the symbols, as you referred to in the last episode and in previous episodes in this book, as this is you frame it as another Bible, semi ironically, and I frame it as more of an update, a translation, a New Testament, if you will, because the wasp yuppie thing is very much in line with the we them systems.
Mm-hmm.
And this having very clearly this fixer be described as finely calibrated as an artillery map where his best interests lie. That is why so much of Gravity's Rainbow is about what it is about.
Yeah.
And furthermore, more to the stylistic perspective, back in that era, he would have written, he has a genius for facilitating outcomes, and he's really very sweet, and would have left it at that. And it's both, the style of this book in particular, to have Maxine translate everything into neo-noir slang, but also it's pretty important for most readers that you do have that translation of he's a fixer. Because, genius for facilitating outcomes. You sit there and you think long enough, you'll figure out that it's saying fixer. But it's helpful. It's helpful to have it really spelled out for the reader.
Yeah, absolutely it is. So she decides, like, why not? I'll go and see this guy. So she makes an appointment to go see him. And we figure out that he works at the high muzzle velocity law firm of Hanover Fisk, which is just a great sentence describing a law firm as high muzzle velocity. But Hanover Fisk also seems to be a pretty easily cloaked pun for hand over fist, as far as making money is concerned. The other interesting thing about this description of his office, which, do you want to read that paragraph starting at Chandler Platt has, and then going to between lewd and benevolent on 280?
Sure. Chandler Platt has a roomy corner office midtown at the high muzzle velocity law firm of Hanover Fisk, up in one of the glass boxes along the 6th Avenue corridor. with a view conducive to delusions of grandeur. Dedicated elevator, a traffic flow design that makes it impossible to tell how much, forget what kind of business is afoot. There seems to be a lot of deep amber and czarist red in the picture. An Asian child intern shows Maxine into the presence of Chandler Platt, who is installed behind a desk made of 40,000-year-old New Zealand cowrie, more like a piece of real estate than a piece of furniture, leading the casual observer, even one with a vanilla view of these matters, to wonder how many secretaries might fit comfortably beneath it and what amenities the space would be furnished with. Restroom conveniences, internet access, futons to allow the little cuties to work in shifts. Such unwholesome fantasies are only encouraged by the smile on Platt's face, uneasily located between lewd and benevolent.
So the reason I wanted to pay attention to that quote is because of the description of Gabriel Ice's apartment earlier in the book, and how you had brought up the fact that it's likely that he doesn't own any of the artwork. Um, that if you really were to look into it, it's more likely that he has it sort of leased or is borrowed to him for display. It just as far as the description of those two living places, how different they are. That this guy who has like the genuine sort of levers of power, being Chandler Platt, how he has this kind of more stately, less gaudy, less showy, but very wealthy sort of place that he lives in. And no one can kind of like take that away from him. It's very much a part of his DNA. Whereas Ice, this guy who we've talked many times through this book, is most likely a stooge, most likely just picked out by the apparatus to get put into this role, has this gaudy, sort of gross, almost art gallery esque sort of show of wealth, as opposed to kind of the sort of real show of power that Chandler Platt has in his office. I mean, the piece of wood that it's described his desk as being, this 40,000-year-old piece of New Zealand kauri. If you look up that tree, that table could be up to 23 feet in diameter from a standpoint of how large it is. So when Pynchon is talking about it having the ability to hold multiple secretaries, he's not kidding. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and it used to be made into furniture. There's some real history behind that. I don't know if it still is. I doubt it is. It's probably protected in some regard by New Zealand, knowing how they treat their wildlife and their ecology in that country. But it is just a very intelligent way to show what the real power is versus the facade of power.
Yeah, and especially the choice of cowrie wood, because even, back in the heyday of, real mahogany and real, endangered species being cut down for statement pieces in an office, um, like cowrie wood was never common. And it's the kind of thing where, again, a lot of this book is very clearly from Maxine's perspective. And this is one of those situations where you start to wonder, is this actually Maxine recognizing it? And, she's a financial analyst and somebody who's done fraud investigation, and I'm sure that she's, run into these kinds of things before, and so would have a reason to be aware of it. But the average person wouldn't. There's no reason to assume that the average person would see this giant desk and think, "Oh my god, this is New Zealand kauri wood." That's just not a thing in most people's minds. This is a very specific type of wood that, while it's distinctive, unless you're a carpenter or, a trained eye at these kinds of status symbols, you're not going to catch it. It's a
Yeah,
really nice touch.
yeah, absolutely. And it's. I think I brought up this Instagram account several episodes ago, but there's an Instagram account that's very good that points out people in real life that are in the upper echelons of wealth, but then also they did a bunch of stuff for like the TV show Succession, where they point out what the price tags are of all the clothes that the people are wearing, and how more often than not these things that look like very basic pieces of clothing, just like a gray sweater, actually cost like $9,000. And how oftentimes, if you're not accustomed to understanding what actual wealth looks like, it is a learning curve almost for you to figure out what those things look like, and where true money ends up being spent.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to the mention of the people looking at the designer labels at the
Yeah.
loans, when, like, yeah, if you're actually coming from money and you're actually the kind of person who would just casually wear designer pieces, you're not going to look at the tag, you're going to look at the stitching, you're going to look at the specific lay of the
Right.
fabric.
Yeah.
You're going to look at the wood that the desk is made out of.
100%. It turns out that Chandler Platt does recognize her, or at least her name, but it has been quite a while because he refers to her as Miss Loeffler instead of Miss Tarnow. Um, and it turns out that him and Elliot Spitzer knew each other, and that was the last time they ran into each other. Um, d- do you? I did research on Elliot Spitzer, but if you know about him and you want to summarize who Elliot Spitzer was for the audience, go ahead, Will.
No, I mean you go for it. I'm a
Okay.
little too young for him to have been something I would have just casually learned about.
Sure. So Elliot Spitzer is most well known for his eventual gubernatorial campaign and period for the state of New York. He was replaced by the Cuomo brother, who was then the governor of New York for years and years and years and years and years until recently. But before Elliot Spitzer was the governor of New York, he was a prosecutor for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, where he became very famous for trying to crack down on financial crimes and corruption. He was known as the Sheriff of Wall Street for a while as a result of that, because of how aggressively he pursued financial crimes. And then eventually he was the Attorney General of the state of New York as well, sort of for doing that. So certainly there is a reason for Chandler Platt and Elliot Spitzer to kind of be on opposite sides of an understanding of power or of money or of advantage. The reason why Maxine would think they would run in different crowds is very well founded in history. However, Elliot Spitzer then turned his very illustrious legal career into a race for the governorship of the state of New York. And he won the governorship at that time by a margin that nobody had ever won the gubernatorial election in the state of New York for ever. And I think maybe potentially still. I think maybe his win is still the highest margin. He was in office for like just over a year, and he got put into a public spectacle because he was caught having gone to a very high priced escort service multiple times. He's like known at this escort service, and then when the escort service was busted, so was he. And so he got all of this stuff got dragged out into the news and into the spotlight, and then he ended up resigning from the governorship of New York. And so if we're looking at kind of the conspiratorial element of the Chandler Platt character and the Elliot Spitzer character, it isn't so far fetched to assume that this was sort of blackmail collected to eventually use as payback for what he would have done to Chandler Platt's friends, which is why, again, as a man who has sort of his finger on the levers of control to the degree of precision of an artillery map, it would make sense why he would smile at this guy with one side of his face and sneer at him with the other side of his face. But it is very interesting New York sort of politician and 90s to 2000s figure. At this point, he would still be acting as the attorney general. His gubernatorial election wasn't until a few more years later.
Yeah, and the passage goes on to kind of be more specific about, as alluded to earlier, the whole system of oh, we're enemies on the ballot, but really we hang out together. And a really good moment in this conversation is the bit where we have Platt saying, "Some of these folks really have become my friends in the pre-internet sense of the term." And it's easy to read that in 2013 or any time after that and think, okay, well, this is an old man making fun of, oh, these people talk about how they have 500 friends on Facebook. Back in my day, a friend was a real friend.
Mhm.
In kind of the same way that, Pynchon, I think, kind of self-indulgently does in like Inherent Vice with love. But at the same time, in the year 2000, for somebody with as much power as Chandler Platt to be aware enough of internet culture to catch on to that kind of thing, he's not just like a grouchy old guy complaining about the youth. This is somebody who's tuned in. He knows what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. He knows what's going on. It's likely that he already has the receipts, so to speak, of Elliot's trips to the escort service in his desk, his massive
Yeah.
desk. Elliot Spitzer also he was educated Harvard and Princeton. So again, as waspy as it comes from an education perspective, which would make sense why him going in there and kind of not sticking to his party, so to speak, would not have been perceived well. But there's also a reference here of them going way back to Skadden Arps, maybe longer. Skadden Arps is a real law firm, very high powered law firm. However, and this was something weird that I found, and I made reference to this in our pre-show conversation. Occasionally when you read Pynchon, you kind of, if you're researching some of the references that he makes, you come across like just weird stuff that has happened. Like the guy from American Airlines resigning shortly after they started flying again in 9/11. That was a weird thing that I came across. This is another one. Somebody on the payroll of Skadden Arps is a man named Michael Leitner. Michael Leitner is the former director of the National Counterterrorism Center. And if you're not familiar with them, the NCTC was founded in 2004 to be an interagency organization bringing together the CIA, the FBI, the DoD, and the DHS in order to collectively work together to stop terrorism and terrorist plots. Michael Leitner served as the director of this interagency office underneath both Bush and Obama. He eventually stepped down and then joined the Skadden Arps firm in 2017 as a partner in its national security practice. He's that's what he's doing for them. Despite the fact that Skadden Arps has nothing to do with national security, Skadden Arps is primarily a law firm dealing with corporate mergers and takeovers. That's like what they do. So why they would need to have this like intelligence agency guy there for national security consulting, it just doesn't make any logical sense. And it's just moments like that where you just read something and it kind of messes with your head for a while because you can't really put it in any kind of logical framework for how you see the world. Just a very strange thing I came across while researching.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything to pull about the book from that, but it's
No.
definitely interesting
It
because,
is.
like, especially just the fact that you can go back with Michael Leitner's history and point to the ultimate. I mean, the symbolism of having the National Council for Counterterrorism existing after the DHS was formed. Like that says so much, and I'm pretty confident that Thomas Pynchon, no matter how insightful of a guy he is, was not seeing the future and
No.
laying the groundworks for people to find this stuff.
Right, exactly. It
Just
it's so it has no relevance, but it's strange that the same law firm he picks would later on hire that guy for seemingly no reason.
exactly, yeah.
um, he and Maxine have a conversation about what she may have found. Eventually, she does relent and show him the video, but not after she gets in a really good line here that says, right, I keep forgetting you people tend to be Mannlicher Carcano types. In case you don't know, that's the rifle that Lee Harvey Oswald supposedly shot JFK with. And then his response is pretty good. He says, Jackie and I were dear friends. He replies coolly, I'm not sure I oughtn't to resent that. Which is again just one of these similar to like the Elliot Spitzer thing we were just talking about. The WASP apparatus has no loyalty beyond those who are following the program. Like the fact that, if this WASP apparatus from a conspiratorial element does exist and does cause these different things to happen, they definitely would have been involved in JFK. And so for this guy to be like, yeah, I killed your husband, but then still have this need to like defend his friendship with Jackie Kennedy is just crazy. But is probably a real life reflection of what that would be like.
Sorry, I got lost there trying to imagine the kind of person who would sincerely take offense at the Mannlicher Carcano reference. Because yeah, if you're actually dear friends with the Jackie Onassis, I guess I can get there. But it's just kind of just a ridiculous mindset to be in, to think that, because obviously, if this weren't a quip back, there would be some mention of the time it took for him to respond. Because if he was actually offended, he wouldn't just immediately say Jackie and I were dear friends, and I'm not sure
Right,
I
yeah.
oughtn't to resent that. Like that's a calculated response.
It is, yeah, absolutely. So she eventually does show him the video, and after it's over, he decides to step out of his office and go speak to some people. And then in his place, uh, his sort of bodyguard, manservant, receptionist. It's hard to really describe what he is, but Darren shows up and plays Maxine the rap song that he's recorded. What did you think of this little aside?
So I find it very, I the way I read this is very weird. It wasn't until like the end of the verse that the first time through I realized that he was supposed to be Asian. And so
Mhm.
the whole time through reading the verse I was just like, what is this very specific angle on gangster rap that this
Right.
guy is coming at this with anyway? But as a fan of hip hop, I it's a very funny verse because the fact is that Thomas Pynchon cannot write a realistic rap verse that someone in their late teens or early 20s in New York would have written, even a nerdy Asian guy. Um, but what he can do is write what is essentially a bizarro world version of Big L doing a political treatise, and that's just amazing. It's incredible because this verse is, again, not an accurate one to like someone from the streets of New York, but it is absolutely, it does read exactly like if Big L had, went to prison and got handed Mao's little red book and then came out of it with like a very specific political intention.
Mhm.
And actually the Pynchon wiki does a really good job of breaking down this verse in terms of references. And so if anyone's curious about what's going on in this verse of a supposed song, it's great. It's a really good explanation of it all, and I'm not gonna just read it out loud because I don't think anyone needs
Yeah.
that. But it is altogether a very a very coherent character, or at least it paints a picture of somebody who would be super into hip hop
Hmm.
and also work at this kind of a law firm.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very interesting aside that just kind of happens, but is also like it's a, as you mentioned, it's a pretty well constructed, like well written verse from Pinchon. Like it's not a bad rap song or segment of one that we get a chance to overhear. And then yeah, I would encourage everybody, if they're looking for like a breakdown of the material, to uh, go check out the Pinchon wiki, and see what those references are pointing to, because it does a very, very thorough breakdown of all of it.
And I would also recommend anybody who thinks the they would like the song that this verse would be from. Seriously, go check out early Jay Z, and Big L, and Big Pun, and some of the other people working in New York City in the early and mid '90s. Because yeah, that aside from the specific political content, it's a pretty reasonable rendition of that, which is
Hmm.
just funny with him saying that he's more of a Nas person because it's a slightly different style, pretty tangible different style. And I don't know if that's an intentional joke or if that's Pynchon being a 75-year-old man writing a book about where he's written a verse that's supposedly from the perspective of like a 20-year-old.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. This is a 20-year-old with a deep media literacy.
An incredible amount of film knowledge.
Absolutely true. And they also just like the relationship between Darren and Chandler Platt is just very interesting. Like he's sort of, as the Pinch on Wiki kind of explains, he's both sort of Chandler's protector but also his slave. It's just a very, the dynamic for as short of an entrance as this character has is very just fascinating. Like I don't unfortunately have much else to add to the conversation on it, but it's just one of these characters that Pinchon occasionally creates that just kind of show up and then make a big impact and then disappear. Chandler Platt comes back from whatever sub basement office he went to and mentions that Darren is just giving away his mixtapes. He's not even selling them. And he provides a very great breakdown of the Republican Party, where he says upon his return, back when I was getting in to the business of being Republican, all it meant was sort of principled greed. You arranged things so that you and your friends would come out nicely, you behaved professionally. Above all, you put in the work and took the money only after you'd earned it. Well, the party I fear has fallen out of that and onto evil days. This generation, it's almost a religious thing now. The millennium, the end days. No need to be responsible anymore to the future. A burden has been lifted from them. The baby Jesus is managing the portfolio of earthly affairs, and nobody begrudges him the carried interest. Suddenly, and from the cookie's point of view, rudely chomping into it and scattering crumbs. Sure you wouldn't have one, or quite no? All right, thanks. Don't mind if I... Grabbing another 2 or 3, actually. I think it's pretty funny how Chandler Platt is giving a very accurate sort of exegesis of what's happened to the Republican Party as he's just shoving cookies in his face. It provides not just a funny visual image, but also the metaphor of, like pilfering the cookie jar, so to speak, of the American dream. It's just an excellent moment of Pinchonian humor.
Definitely. And so I watched Inherent Vice with a friend a couple weeks back, and this scene was such a strong reminder of that scene where I can't even remember his name, tells Doc, "Well, people like you lose my respect as soon as you pay rent to somebody."
Oh,
Very
Crocker Fenway.
Yes, Fenway. Thank you very much. But it's very much the same vibe as I made the mistake of asking him once how he expects to make money. To me, I'm appalled. It strikes at the heart of exchange itself. Just the exact same attitude right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, Crocker Fenway is obviously part of the same apparatus that Chandler Platt is. They're all just kind of like that. But also, Pinchon here gives like a pretty prophetic breakdown of what the Republican Party has even further continued to be into the 2020s from a standpoint of the mainstream Republicans. That mentality of no care for the future, safeguarding for the next generation, and just everything is borrowed interest. That's very accurate to how they do politics, especially as it relates to the environment or regulatory agencies and all of that.
Yeah, and a lot of Pynchon's like relatively presently set books, whether it's this or Crying of Lot 49 or Vineland or Inherent Vice, all do kind of a decent job of charting that. The way that it went from, the principled Nixonian proto-fascism to the very unserious, self-centered Reaganism to the modern day of, George W. Bush pretending to be an absolute moron for his entire presidency.
You think it was an act?
I really don't have an opinion. It doesn't matter to me, But I think that's the charitable interpretation.
Sure. Yeah. It's fair. He then goes on to say that the people that he talks to already know what's going to happen. This event, they know, and they're not going to do anything about it, which really just goes to speak that the whole thing that Maxine's been investigating this entire time, that the wheels for it are already in motion. It's already going to happen. Nothing is going to stop it at this point. Maxine could publish the video on March's Weblog, but it probably wouldn't have any effect. The sort of die has already been cast, so to speak. And then, as they're about to kind of part ways, he gives one last sort of note of advice here where he says, try to avoid terrorist related activities, which just very much feels like he's just giving the game away of just like, yeah, this is the justification we're going for to accomplish what we want to accomplish, and you shouldn't get involved. He's very open about what's going on. He has no interest in concealment whatsoever because he knows most likely that even if she said anything, nothing would actually happen. There'd be no repercussions.
Yeah, the kind of guy who has, a 50,000-year-old giant plank of wood for a desk.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. He could have you killed in his office if he wanted to.
And Darren would probably sweep up the remains.
Yeah, most likely. Speaking of Darren, did you have any thoughts on the fact that Maxine thinks that he's the departure splash screen image?
My only real thoughts in that regard, or that it think it might be more of just a generational thing,
Mm-hmm.
because totally it could be that Cassidy knows this guy and da 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 da. Da. That's totally possible. But it also could just be the fact that this is a generation of people who grew up in a post-Reagan era. They understand that the game is rigged, and so he's made it to the top floor. He's still at the bottom of the top floor, but he's made it there, and he's looking down, and there's just kind of a resigned sense of whatever, and that might have been captured by Cassidy, literally captured from his face, but it might just be, you know, the same attitude that whoever modeled for it did or had.
Absolutely. The only thing that I potentially came out with off the back of that was that it still shows that she has this like weird, over enthusiastic obsession for what she saw the one time she played the game. That like she's still making sort of real life connections between it and her surroundings that she's actively involved in.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's wormed its way into her head. It's not
Absolutely
coming out.
true. Yeah. Maxine then leaves and she runs into Emma Levin, Ziggy's Krav Maga teacher, out on the street, who is there to meet her boyfriend for lunch. This is an interesting sort of back and forth. We learn more about both Emma and her partner, Naftali. There's a reference here to Naftali being a flaneur, which is sort of a word that describes somebody going through life, observing the world around them, but not participating in it. And then just saying that he's a flaneur who can be triggered silently and instantly into the wrath of God, I think is a really neat way to describe sort of an espionage agent undercover, which he may or may not be, given the fact that later on she mentions that people are out of town, specifically her kids and her ex husband, and he says, "Good place to be." Naftali's speeding his beat a little, and Emma flashing him to look. So he's obviously already aware of this, and this has got to be a case where just like Maxine is being sent down a paranoia rabbit hole of just like everybody that I'm now interacting with just knows what I don't know, and they're not gonna reveal it, but I know they know. Like it's got to be the kind of thing that really drives you crazy.
Yeah, because it could totally be that. It could totally be, realistically, a Krav Maga instructor in 2000 is not unlikely to have connections to Mossad, and it seems like
Right.
they would likely not lie about it
Yeah.
because, I mean, come on, that seems a little stupid as a Jewish woman teaching Krav Maga to go around lying about your boyfriend being Mossad agent.
Mhm.
That seems like you're just asking for some horrible person to take you at your word in the worst way possible.
Yeah, definitely. You,
Um,
you you could definitely get away with being a Krav Maga instructor, not associated with Mossad now, but not back then.
yeah, exactly. And so, you know, regardless of any engagement with regardless of any possible engagement that that the Israeli government had with 9/11, even in the context of this book. It could just be that Naftali is just saying, "Hey, it's good to be out of the center of everything. It's
Hmm.
good to be in the Midwest, in the provinces. It's good to be away from Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. It's good to be away from New York City or LA. It's good to just be a person." Because, as indicated, he's a flaneur.
Hmm.
He he's a Mossad agent. He probably just would like to be a normal person at this point. It can't be a low key, relaxing gig. He's probably just wish like either he's involved or he's just wishing to be like a normal person.
Right.
And I think either way, it makes a lot of sense for him
Yeah.
to say that.
Def- I did find in my research of the term flaneur, Walter Benjamin says that the concept of the flaneur died out with consumer capitalism, which just related to a section earlier where Maxine says that like she's so anxious she just has to go shopping. Like
Yeah.
it's just a very real thing in the 21st century that like people have lost the ability to just sort of exist in public. Like third spaces are gone, and just sort of going around in public, not engaging in the consumeristic elements. It's so much harder to do now. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but given how intensely consumerism and gentrification, how the two of those things intersect with one another in this book, it's interesting that there was previously sort of established scholarship on the idea that couldn't exist anymore.
Yeah, and if there's anyone who could pull off that kind of balancing act of engagement but disattachment, a spy would be one of them.
Yeah, probably the only one.
Yeah, because at the very least, they're separated enough from the means of production, yet have enough money to, finance just sitting at the cafe watching the world go by,
Hmm.
to not actually have the personal debt to the structures which give them the wealth, while still having the means to actually just sit at a cafe and order an espresso every few hours.
Right. Which is a very peaceful existence, if it was possible.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts you have from chapter 26 before we move to 27?
I wanted to ask, is this the first time we get Ziggy's full name?
I think so. Yeah.
It's a pretty great that his name is Ziggurat. At
Yeah.
the very least, it's a very entrenched nickname.
Right. Yeah, I don't know which I would want to be true, because either her giving her child the nickname of Ziggurat or her actually naming her child Ziggurat. I don't know which of those would be better, but they're both pretty excellent.
Yeah, the question then is like, okay, so is he actually named after the cartoon character?
Hmm.
Because otherwise, I'm not sure where you're getting the name Ziggy.
Very good question. Yeah, I mean, the only other thing that I could think of is, if Luke was here, he would probably bring up the fact that there's a Gene Wolfe short story called The Ziggurat. Um, could be a reference there from a real deep cut, but either way, just a great piece of aside, or a great aside there for a piece of information that may or may not be accurate to what his birth certificate says.
Yeah, and then, you do get the sense that Naftali either is just kind of a cool dude who happened to end up in one of the most tense lines of work possible,
Hmm.
or he's a very well trained spy who's very good at disarming people, because you do get the sense that Maxine is really enjoying this casual flirting.
Yeah, definitely. I think that she's predisposed to enjoy flirting like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
27 opens up with two real cities in Wisconsin being name dropped, Prairie du Chien and Fond du Lac. As someone who is from Wisconsin, I would not. Well, I'm not from Wisconsin. I live here. I would not have anticipated those two particular towns to be brought up. Um, both of them are not amongst the tourist destinations for for Wisconsin. So why Pinchon picked them is an interesting choice. Um, It is there to say that Horst has come back into town with their children, and they've returned. And there's just some lovely writing about the Midwest in these first couple pages of the chapter. Just the way that certain things are described, or the appeal of sort of like a Midwest like kind of living, which feels very unique in a lot of ways to especially the places that Pynchon normally covers. And there seems to be like a very genuine love for the Midwest in a lot of this writing here. That Pynchon almost envies that isn't the kind of place that he can live in, or that he would maybe go a little crazy living in it, but he appreciates people who can.
Yeah, and at the very least, even if he doesn't have a sincere love for it, it is at the very least, a coastal elite being willing to sit back and have a express appreciation for things that are not metropolitan and busy.
Yeah, very true. Come and Go is a real gas station chain, by the way, in case people didn't know. Um, it's named after the founders. Their initials were K and G. um, we then get a really lovely description of Ziggy and Otis making friends at an arcade. Um, this back and forth they have with the two other kids, it's so good. I love it so much. It's like they're talking to the two kids from the comic shop in the Lost Boys, um, whose names I can't remember. I know one of them is played by Corey Feldman, but like they're kind of skeptical like back and forth as they're trying to like suss out each other's like levels of nerd. Um, it's really enjoyable, and seemingly pretty realistic dialogue between these four children.
Yeah, I've never been in the specific context of being a pair of brothers, being in a pair of brothers from New York in the Midwest, meeting another pair of brothers in an arcade while you're both trying, both parties are trying to suss out how honest they should be about how much of nerds they are.
Hmm.
But it does remind me a lot of being a kid and being in those kinds of environments and trying to like not embarrass yourself while still very clearly from a third party perspective, like making it really obvious that you are a
Yeah,
massive nerd.
yeah. It's just silly and fun and endearing. Of just like that exact thing you're describing is just such a good sort of depiction of the innocence of childhood.
Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts on Hydro Thunder at all?
Well, I played Hydro Thunder when I was a kid.
Yeah, I've
So
never played it. I played a lot of Time Crisis though.
see, I was raised in one of those families that said no shooting games.
Oh, my parents didn't know.
Oh
Um,
yeah, of course.
yeah,
Well, and I mean
growing
Time Crisis of all of them. Yeah.
yeah, growing up in the Midwest, we kind of just went camping a lot. Like my family didn't have the money to like go to like Disney or any like theme parks or whatever, but they did have the money to buy just like a pop-up camper and some tents. And so we would go camping to these different state campgrounds. And then there was one that we visited a lot, and I don't know, I can't remember where it was, but there was a Time Crisis machine in the like shower building. Like there's like
Okay.
there's like showers, laundry, and then in the laundry area there was a Time Crisis machine, and I think maybe a couple of other arcade machines. And so I would just sneak away from the campground, and I'd go play Time Crisis in the laundry and shower building. Um, and they never found out, but they probably would have been very upset if they knew I was playing a game where I was shooting people with a fake gun.
And I mean, I seriously, I don't know if I ever ended up playing Time Crisis, even as like a teenager.
That's a
But
shame.
yeah, I mean, it always seemed pretty fun. But I will say, Hydro Thunder, very fun. I'm not sure that the subwoofer was as entrancing to me as it was to Gridley, but
you
it's
didn't
pretty
you,
good.
you didn't get a thrill out of sitting on a subwoofer.
Not personally, no judgment to anyone who does, but no, it's just a fun, essentially racing game.
Hmm. Not quite as violent as as they would have depicted, huh?
Well, no, I mean it is totally violent, but it's not a person standing there that you're shooting in the face with a replica gun. There's a
Sure.
you're driving around a tiny version of the Titanic with the machine gun on it. It's a little bit it's a little cartoonish. One might even
Gotcha.
say arcadey.
I've never actually seen it before, so I've never had an opportunity to play it. But I love that it's a real arcade game.
I mean, maybe I'm crazy. I've definitely played like a boat racing game with like, you know, combat mechanics
Yeah.
that's name was similar to Hydro Thunder. Let me look it up. Maybe I maybe it's just Pinch and gaslighting me.
No, the Pinch on Wiki says it's a real game, so it does exist.
Oh yeah, I've definitely played that. It's very fun. Yeah.
After this recap of their trip to the Midwest, Horst makes a request where he says, "Would it be okay if I stuck around for a while?" Resisting anything like a double take. You mean tonight? Maybe a little longer? What's this? Long as you like, Horst, we're still splitting the maintenance here. Gracious as it is possible at the moment to be, when she'd rather be watching a former sitcom actress pretending to be a youngish mom in peril. If it's problematic, I can stay somewhere else. The boys will be thrilled, I think. She watches his mouth begin to open and then close again. He nods and withdraws to the kitchen, from which soon could be heard sounds of refrigerator entry and plundering. This is such an interesting sort of exchange, and it remains their exchanges back and forth with one another remain very interesting for the rest of this chapter, because it really seems as though Horst is now trying to make an effort, not just with their kids, but also potentially with their relationship, beyond what he clearly has been for a while. And Maxine is initially resistant to that by obviously choosing the words very carefully of like, oh, well, the kids would be very happy about it. And he seems like disheartened by that. I love that description of like she watches his mouth begin to open and then close, because I think that really does portray the dynamic there very well. And as we go through this chapter, I'll bring up other moments that kind of support this. But again, I have come away from this reading with the belief that Horst was an abusive husband during the time that they were together, and that Maxine does have a genuine love for him, but there's this factor of the person that he is that is harder for her to sort of get over and accept kind of these overtures that he's moving towards. But it's just this chapter, like I said kind of at the beginning of the episode, is very much about the two of them in my mind, and kind of this interesting dynamic that the two of them have with one another.
Yeah, I mean I don't disagree with anything you've said. I do really I do think it's interesting to try and puzzle out their relationship in general,
Yeah.
because even in the absolute best case scenario where, it really was just the one time that he, to use a slightly outdated turn of phrase, laid hands on her, um like that there's still no good there. He's still
Right.
even in that absolute best case scenario, you know, he's still like abusive by means of emotional neglect as much as you can be with someone who's
Mhm.
an adult. Like very much this is a relationship where Maxine should be putting up barriers and shouldn't be inviting him to stay there. And the question really becomes like, how much do you believe that this man could have or would have changed?
Right.
And it's, I mean, I don't think we really get any kind of strong indication either way by the end of the book. Because, sure, him asking and putting things the way he does is an indication, but it's not a good one.
Mhm.
It's very easy to lie.
Yeah, very true.
Because I mean, it really sounds like he was a really bad husband. Again, even assuming that he had like some momentary psychotic incident that led to him choking her,
Mhm.
which is pretty unlikely.
Right. Yeah, choking is not where physical abuse typically starts.
Yeah, exactly.
Next morning, Maxine gets a envelope inviting her to Let's see how it's described here. Do you want to read the invitation?
Inside is a card on an expensive stock with calligraphic hand lettering. Ms. Maxine Tarnow Loeffler, pleasure of your company is requested at the first annual Grand Rentrée Ball, or Geeks Cotillion, Saturday night, the 8th of September 2001. Twerkfx.com. Open bar, closed optional, bracket, haha, only serious, bracket.
Yeah, so she's been invited out to what Driscoll Paget is claiming is going to be a particularly end of the world as we know it party, and Driscoll then says that it's going to be the alley's biggest pink slip party. It'll be about the open bar, if nothing else. Gabriel Ice has now also purchased Torquefx.com, Torquefx, however that's supposed to be pronounced, which builds and maintains virtual private networks. Very obvious why he would want that for his whole operation he's got going on. And he discovered a party fund that was sitting for years in escrow, which is just a crazy thing to do with your party fund money. But again, we get another sort of allusion to Josh Harris here, in that Gabriel Ice is throwing these massive parties, which was something Josh Harris was doing during the Silicon Alley days. And I love the description of the idea of it being an end of the world as we know it party, because that's just sort of more accurate than the narrator knows. That it is sort of the last hurrah before, as I have said, the end of history arrives.
Yeah, and just I do love the awareness that Driscoll goes into it saying this is going to be a pink slip party, and beyond that, just the choice of the name Twerkfx, really weird. A big brand that builds and maintains VPNs at that point in time would be like, oh, whatever. It's not coming to me enough to even find it anyway. But that's just such a, like, is it supposed to be a pun on work ethic? Because if it isn't, it's just like someone slammed their face on a keyboard, essentially.
Yeah. I don't know. And I mean, it could just be a joke for the sake of how stupid a lot of these names were in real life, as we've talked about.
Yeah.
Much like hash slingers or, Hagawach. It is. There's like a write up about it in the Pinch on Wiki that I don't know. I couldn't really make heads or tails of what they were trying to say with it. They were trying to relate it back to like Usher, but it doesn't seem like that's necessarily what Pinch on would be doing here. But it is a very interesting name for a company, that's for sure. The next day, Maxine starts getting a bunch of calls from people that may be coming into town for Labor Day. Suddenly, all of these sort of tourist destinations are becoming filled with people visiting New York for the summer, or the end of the summer, as it be. Horst has been spending more time with the boys, and it also mentions that he's been spending more time than he ever used to before, according to Maxine's memory, and that that he's actually like making an effort to kind of be a father. He takes them to a Yankee game. He takes them to a skee ball parlor in Manhattan, and then finally he brings them around to get their back to school haircuts done at a barber shop called El Atildado. This whole interaction is really something. The description of this barbershop, and the fact that people come down here trying to hawk stolen items so regularly that plainclothes police officers, in this case one Carmine Nizzoli, is standing by to try and catch perps in the act, and to the degree that somebody wheels an entire barbecue down here for sale. It's just a great bit of Pinchonian absurdity while they're getting their hair cut.
Yeah, and this is one of those situations where I think it would be beneficial to have somebody amongst our hosts who'd spent like a lot of time in a major city, because I do get the sense that this is the kind of thing that happens, just elevated a little bit.
Yeah, it feels very real, but in a Pinchonian way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't say that I've spent much time. This kind of stuff doesn't happen at hair salons. I've never had somebody wheel any sort of an item for sale at my hairdressers at all.
Yeah, and I sport long hair, so I don't
Oh,
go to most barber shops, so it's not a not a thing that I've experienced at all. And Albuquerque is the kind of place where you're gonna have random people coming up to you in the street offering things for sale more than they're gonna come to stores because the store owner's gonna have a gun.
Hmm. When Maxine gets home, she notices that Horst is in the dining room attempting to assemble a computer desk for their child. It says here, blood already streaming from several fingers, reading glasses about to slide off the sweat on his nose, mysterious metal and plastic fasteners littering the floor, instruction sheets torn and flapping everywhere, screaming, the default phrase being fucking IKEA. This is one example of, again, a temper that he likely had, which is signs of potentially the fact that he would have been a physically abusive husband pretty regularly, if not just at least a temperous one. And then there proceeds to be a very long paragraph about a trip they took to IKEA, which I was howling with laughter throughout the entirety of reading. It's so funny. It's I've never actually been to an IKEA, but I know a lot of people who have been to IKEAs, and this does seem to pretty accurately depict the experience of going to one. But I do love the joke at the end here, where it says horses bewildered in a potentially violent sort of way. Again, another mention of violence. But he says, look at this, a bar stool named Sven. Some old Swedish custom. The winter kicks in, weather gets harsh. After a while, you find yourself relating to the furniture in ways you didn't expect. It's really good. It's really good stuff.
It's very fun.
Yeah.
I have an aberrant relationship with IKEA. Because I've been to IKEA a few times. I enjoy IKEA.
Hmm.
Everything in this is completely accurate, though. It's a very solid description of going to IKEA. On the other hand, I've never had an issue assembling IKEA furniture,
Neither have I.
and the funny thing about all of this is, for anyone who doesn't know, the IKEA furniture names are a joke on non-Swedish people. They are made up to look like things that non-Swedish or Norwegian speakers would assume a Scandinavian person would name something. And so like some of the specific things, like I think there is a bar stool named Sven that is like named for an employee early on in the business. But most of them are just like random syllables put together for the sake of making fun of people who think that they would be real words.
Yeah. I've know a lot about IKEA for never having been, which is weird. But I also have multiple pieces of IKEA furniture that have been gotten for me by people. I don't know what it is about me that screams, I'm going to IKEA. Let me ask Kate if she needs anything. But I have had multiple people mention that they're going to IKEA, the one IKEA that's in Wisconsin, and then asking if I need any furniture. And so I have pieces of IKEA furniture, but I've never actually been to one, which seems weird to a lot of the friends that I have. It seems like something you're just kind of supposed to do at some point in your adult life. But it's not difficult to put together, which again gets to the point of Horse getting really upset for no reason at something.
Well, yeah, I think that's definitely supposed to be an interpretation. But at the same time, I've known so many people who just can't handle it. There's
Really
something about IKEA that just bewilders them. And none of these
interesting.
people are the kinds of people who would ever put together furniture anyway. So I'm pretty sure it's just like a
Oh,
lack of
okay.
experience with any kind of like looking at a blueprint or a plan and building something out of it.
Hmm.
But still, it's basically Lego. The fact is that most people seem to get mad at IKEA for some reason. So I don't know if it's an intentional look. Horst is insecure and gets violent easily, or if it's just a comment on so many people getting violent with IKEA furniture,
Yeah,
because
I
it
guess
is
I
a
didn't
thing.
know that was a commonality. There's also a pretty solid paragraph in here talking about sort of more of Horst's psychology, the fact that he didn't think that he was a domestic person. He kind of his ideal place is sort of wintry, ratty hotel rooms deep in the Midwest, and just sort of how they're sort of different from each other in that regard. And then there's this moment where they put on the Weather Channel on mute, and they kind of have like their first real kind of heart to heart moment here, where Maxine finds herself talking about work and Horst improbably listening. Not that it's any of his business, of course, but then again, a recap. What could hurt? This documentary guy, Reg Despard, his twice as paranoid IT genius, Eric, they spot something cute in the bookkeeping at hashslingers.com. Okay, Reg comes to me with it, thinks it's sinister, global in scope, maybe to do with the Mid East, but it could be too much X-Files or whatever. Pause, skillfully disguised as taking a breath, waiting for Horst to get all pissy. Again, another reference to his bad attitude. But he's slowly blinking, slowly yet, which may signal some interest. Now it seems Reg has disappeared mysteriously, though maybe only out to Seattle. And so they just kind of have this this sort of moment where we get an idea of what potentially a functional relationship between the two of them could look like. And it's just sort of this whole sort of closing scene is nice because it transitions from that kind of shop talk, so to speak, to Maxine asking Horst to come with her to this geeks cotillion that's being put on, and the two of them just sort of slow dance in their living room. And even though I have the theories about Horst that I have, and even though we've been told that he has abused her at least the one time, you can't help but come away from that scene of them slow dancing in the living room and their children kind of peeking in at them without a real sense of endearing family sort of love. It's a very beautiful scene that Pynchon writes.
Yeah, and it's one of those situations. Again, it's hard to tell with Horst throughout the whole book how much of whatever Maxine wants to believe about him is true. Because, very little of this book is not through her eyes. And it does seem like for him, being willing to try to merengue and being willing to, totter back and forth to the Copacabana is a big step for him.
Yeah.
But it's also easy to make a couple of big steps and then go right back. So it's hopeful.
It is. It's just it's sort of a nice moment.
Yeah.
Anything else that you have from chapter 27?
Well, we did skim right over the long diatribe about Horst and his history working in Chicago trading commodities. And I don't have anything to pull out of that in particular. Because I think it's mostly just table setting, but I don't know. I just don't know very much about commodities trading or any of these things, so it's hard to pull anything out of, except for the fact that he started at the Merc trading 3-month Eurodollar futures, both clients and himself, wearing a custom trader's jacket with tastefully muted green and magenta stripes, and a 3-letter name tag pinned to it. First of all, no way they were tastefully muted green and magenta stripes.
No, that's impossible.
Yeah. However, it is just generally an interesting passage. Very almost hypnagogic in the way that Pynchon tells it. When it's just a guy walking around looking at some beans here and there to back up his intuitions about the market.
Right, yeah. I think that it is a lot of it is just sort of set dressing as far as why Horst is out there, but I think you could spin it out to something to do with as soon as you can't trade in fictional currency manipulation, you end up tying consumeristic and capitalistic ideals to the land itself that's growing, and the idea that the land is directly being tied in this case to market forces and capitalism and all of that could be what he's just sort of trying to depict there, and that this person has a genuine reverence for the Midwest and feels himself and at home there, but still is not above exploiting it for the purpose of monetary gain.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good high level way to look at it for sure.
Yeah, and I mean there is some truth to the fact that there was a time period where it seemed like a lot of trading operations were moving to the Midwest. That is like a thing in Chicago in particular. There's actually the trading building that a lot of that happened in Chicago. I can't remember the name of the the goddess that's on top of it, but there's a statue of a goddess on top of this building that, with how the architecture was designed and built, it has its back facing to the east, and it was supposed to literally be like an architectural representation of the idea that like the economic hub and the trading hub of the United States was no longer in the east in New York. It was now in Chicago because of where things are moving. So it could also just be kind of a depiction of the fact that that is a very real part of American history, not so much anymore. And maybe that's why why Horst is trying to make some sort of change in the business that he conducts from New York to Chicago to kind of combine with his love of the area. But that would be the only other thing that I could really pull out of it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think beyond that specific passage, I think the way that later in the chapter, Horst's ideal, or well, Horst's head, in fact, is a single nationwide snowdrift of motel rooms in far windswept spaces that Maxine will never know how to find her way to, is a kind of a good reinforcement of that interpretation. Because first of all, that alone, I can't imagine anyone. I can't imagine Horst the way he's described being anything but that on the inside.
Yeah,
And B, yeah, no, it makes sense that that kind of person would also have this weird, kind of hollowly romantic way of thinking about commodities exchanging.
right. Yeah, I would agree. Anything else from chapter 27?
No, not really. There are some nice little moments here and there, but I think anyone who's reading the book, is catching them too. Just things like the still farm fields come and farm fields go. Just like little jokes here and there. The chapter's full of that scale of little jokes, and I find them very satisfying.
Yeah, me too. Well, if we don't have anything else from chapter 27, that takes us to the end of these chapters. Are there any funny parts that we didn't go over in the course of covering it?
Well, like a lot of these kind of connective tissue chapters, there are a lot of little jokes, but nothing that I really feel the need to point out. Did anything stand out to you?
No, I mentioned all the ones that I specifically had.
Yeah, I mean, there are fun ones like the Mafia,
Oh yeah, that's true. That was pretty funny.
but they're all that scale, and all again pretty self-evident to anyone reading the book. So I don't feel the need to pull them up together.
True enough. So what do you have for your quote for this week?
Well, my issue is that the ones that I had just stating in my mind as my choices, we did read out.
Oh, sorry.
No, no problem. It's just you can go ahead if you'd like, or we can just cut out the dead air while I page through.
Yeah, I can read mine if you want. Mine comes from some of the sort of long passages of description about the Midwest. I specifically love on page 290 here where it says, "The Loeffler grand folks, all through their visit, were over the moon, the specifically Iowa moon, which from the front porch was bigger than any moon the boys had ever seen, rising over little trees whose silhouettes were shaped like lollipops, making everybody forget about what they might have been missing on the tube, which was on inside, but more as an accent light than anything. They ate at malls all across Iowa, at Villa Pizza, Bishop's Buffet. Horace introduced them to Maid-Rites, as well as to local variations on the Louisville Hot Brown. Further into the summer and days to the west, they matched the wind in different wheat fields and waded through the country's wide silences when it grows dark in the middle of the afternoon and lightning appears at the horizon. They went looking for arcade games and derelict shopping plazas and riverside pool halls and college town hangouts and ice cream parlors tucked into the mid-block micro malls. Horace couldn't help noticing how the places had, most of them, grown more ragged since his time. Floors less swept, air conditioning not as intense, smoke thicker than in the Midwestern summers of long ago. They played ancient machines from faraway California said to be custom programmed by Nolan Bushnell himself. They played Arkanoid and Ames and Zaxxon and Sioux City. They played Road Blasters and Galaga 88, Tempest and Rampage and Robotron 2084, which Horse believes to be the greatest arcade game of all time. Mostly, whenever they could find it, they seemed to be playing Time Crisis too. I really love those passages because I genuinely love the Midwest. Like, I've lived here for my entire life. I've been to Europe. I've been to major metropolitan areas. I've lived in Berlin for a little bit, and yet to me, I've always loved the Midwest more than anything else. And I think that he depicts a lot of aspects of Midwest culture in the whole section is like 3 pages, but he depicts a lot of like genuine aspects of Midwest culture and um, aspects of Midwest like cuisine and all of that. And unlike, and this kind of gets back to what I was saying earlier, unlike a lot of his other descriptions of like food or places, he doesn't he doesn't do so with kind of a sardonic tongue. He doesn't denigrate these places and these things. It seems as though he kind of views it in not necessarily an Edenic way, but that there is something a bit better about the way life is done here than other places. And I feel like a part of that depiction is the fact that he specifically calls out the fact that nobody in Iowa, when they were visiting Horace's grandparents, were watching the tube, that the tube was just sort of in the background. I think that might be the only time that ever happens in one of Pynchon's novels. And so his depiction of kind of like the way that life is done in this part of the country and like the sort of sensibility of the people and all of that and the intoxication that some people have for it, like Horst, just rings very true for me. Growing up in Chicago and then moving to Wisconsin when I was 13 and kind of being here since, it's a really nice place to be, and it's not always represented fairly or honestly in a lot of literature or at all. So it's nice that when it comes up in a book by an author that I like that I like so much that it's done this way. It was very it's always a very nice passage to read through whenever I read this book.
Yeah, I definitely did consider that section because it, like you say, it's really just a lovely moment of sincerity from
Hmm.
an author who can really often fairly be criticized for his use of irony.
Yeah, yeah.
I suppose I will go to a section that we talked about, but we didn't read through because I just think it deserves to be read out. Um,
Okay.
Back in chapter 26, page 278, 279. In the course of lunchtime yakking, Maxine gets an earful of Slajat marriage history. Though the attraction was perverse and immediate, Cornelia and Rocky, it seems, did not so much fall in love as stumble into a classic NYC folie à deux. She, charmed at the notion of marrying into an immigrant family, expecting a Mediterranean soul, matchless cooking, and uninhibited embrace of life, including not quite imaginable Italian sex activities, he meanwhile looking forward to initiation into the mysteries of class, secrets of elegant dress and grooming and high society repartee, plus a limitless supply of old money to borrow against without having to worry too much about debt collection, or not the kind he was used to anyway. Imagine the mutual dismay on learning the real situation. Far from the Channel 13 upper-class dynasty he expected, Rocky discovered in the Thrubwells a tribe of nose-picking vulgarians with the fashion sense and conversational skills of children raised by wolves, and with the collective net worth Dun and Bradstreet barely acknowledged. Cornelia was equally stunned to find that the Slojatis, most of whom were distributed along a suburban archipelago well east of the Nassau line, and for whom the closest thing to an Italian feast was to order in from Pizza Hut, did not do warmth, even amongst themselves. Regulating the children, for example, not with the genial screaming or smacking around one might have expected from an adolescent spent at the Thalia watching neorealistic films, but with cold, silent, indeed, one must say pathological glaring. I mean, on a prose level, it's top tier, and
Mhm.
on a characterization level, as we gushed about earlier, it's just really insightful and again sweet in a weird, perverse way.
Yeah, absolutely. The Pynchon is the master of being able to like introduce a character or a couple of characters and give you that gestalt of like who they are in their life in just one paragraph. It's very impressive. And I did skip over it on purpose because I figured someone would pick it for their quote at the end of the show.
Yeah, and it's not just the lazy way to do that. The lazy way to make that kind of same structure joke be to have his life be his home life be the stereotypical wasp life and vice
Hmm.
versa. And there are shades of that, but that's not what's going on. It's just these are normal people living normal lives who have idealized one another in a weird way.
Yeah, very, very, very good one. Most pinch on part of the chapter. Do you have one that comes to mind?
Well, I think somewhere between the Girl Scout cookies at Chandler Platt's office,
The
the rat,
potentially poisoned Girl Scout cookies at
yeah,
Chandler Platt's office.
which he then proceeds to shovel down his own throat.
Yeah.
To the rap verse, to his like very specific discussion about how giving away your mixtape strikes at the heart of exchange.
Hmm.
It's all very Pinchonian in Congress.
Yeah, I agree. I would also say that like probably just sort of the whole of the Chandler Platt sequence, like
Yeah.
as a character and sort of what he represents and the dichotomy between him and Gabriel Ice and how that represents to real power and all of that. It it is, and just all of the other like references and everything that are packed into that whole scene. It feels very distinctly Pinchonian to me.
Well, you don't think that a lot of authors would try to write a young Asian man's take on punchline hip hop
No, I
with a
don't.
Maoist tilt?
No, I don't think there's many 75-year-old authors who would understand punchline hip hop or Mao well enough to be able to combine those two things into a workable rap verse. It is very impressive.
It is, as much as I mocked it earlier for not being, realistic for the character exactly.
Mhm.
It's still pretty impressive how close it comes.
Yeah, definitely. We did get a couple of comments from listeners over the past week, mostly from YouTube. Looks like we have somebody going through a lot of our videos who goes by the name John Glenn on YouTube. Thank you for watching, and thank you for the recommendation to watch Archive 81. I've heard very good things about the show. I know it's a podcast as well, but I haven't listened to it. Um, it does certainly match the VHS motif. We did also get a comment from someone named Leant P, I believe is how you would pronounce that name. I don't think there's really a good way to go about it. But they said, thank you for sharing Hunter Thompson's routine. You're welcome. That's a routine that I kind of just go back to revisit anytime I need a laugh because of how absurd it is. And just, thinking about the kind of life that guy must have lived, like, no wonder that was the kind of writer he was and how he was as a sort of character of the American mythology. If any of you guys haven't read Hunter S. Thompson's work, I'd highly recommend it. It's worth your time. He was kind of seen as a bit paranoid in his day, but I think history has really proved that a lot of the stuff that he wrote about and talked about, he was actually kind of right on the money. Just was maybe a bit of ahead of his time.
Yeah, and definitely had a specific perspective.
Yes, he did.
When you're doing an 8 ball of cocaine every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. We also got a comment on one of our Mason and Dixon videos, I guess, episodes, from Nick Dreisen. He said, or she, I don't know, Nick said, loving all of these videos, really helping me with the read through, and we're glad to hear it. That's why we make this. We want to at the very least provide some random noise for listeners to bounce their own ideas off of, because
Right.
that's always helpful when you're reading books as dense as Mason and Dixon, especially.
Yeah, definitely. That I think we all kind of agreed that was a book that we could have spent twice as much time on, but did what we could without it becoming a very exhaustive process.
Yeah.
Well, that does bring us to the end of the show. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you to those who sent out comments on the YouTube channel. We love always hearing from our listeners and being able to engage with them. Thank you as well to everyone who filled out the listener survey. We will be going over the data from that and kind of seeing if there's any different directions we need to take the show in. But by and large, it was a lot of very, very positive feedback, and we thank you guys for taking the time to answer those questions and for just listening in general. For those who do not know, you can email us at mappingthezonepod@gmail.com. We are also on Twitter, where you can contact us at pinchonpod. We are also on Instagram at Mapping the Zone Podcast, and we are on YouTube as well at Mapping the Zone Podcast. Thank you, as always, once again for listening. I know I say that like way too many times every single outro, but I'm not a professional. Next week, we will be back, and we will be covering chapters 28, 29, and 30.
Okay, bye.
Bye!
I did want to share.
Yeah.
I knew that beef tongue was a staple in Ashkenazi communities.
Yeah.
I didn't know that the specific recipe that that Pynchon put into the book was a real one.
Mm-hmm.
And it just does sound delicious.
It's very good.
Yeah, I mean, I understand why it would be like one of those, like, real but seems like a joke things that he puts in the books.
Right.
And why it would be gross to people. But I mean, come on.
Yeah, you just simmer beef tongue and all of that flavor for hours, and then you slice it up. It's delicious. This
mean,
is the secret to a lot of Ashkenazi cuisine. Is it's a lot of aromatic or flavorful ingredients that simmer together for the better part of a day, because you start cooking them the day before Shabbos, and then you eat them on Shabbos because you can't start cooking on Shabbos, and that leads to some really excellent recipes.
I will say, looking it up after hearing you mention the fact that it's a real recipe and not just like a mishmash of recipes.
Mm-hmm.
My goodness, the ones that people post online are so terrible. Looking at one right now on kosher.com, which I honestly would not have expected to be good.
Sure.
But half-pound prepared pickled tongue from your deli counter. 2 tablespoons oil, 1 tablespoon mustard, 5 tablespoons spiced ketchup, 2 tablespoons white vinegar, and 1/4 cup brown sugar. Like, I like beef tongue. I'm sure I'd enjoy that. It
Mm-hmm.
does sound so much worse than the one with 1,000 different dried fruits
Yeah.
and spices.
Yeah, you gotta add more than just that, for sure. Yeah, you should, I don't know if there's a Jewish quarter of Albuquerque, but you should head over there and see if someone can make you some.
There absolutely is not a Jewish quarter of Albuquerque, but beef
Dang.
tongue is a staple in Mexican and New Mexican food, so I can
That
definitely
makes
get
sense.
the tongue. It might not be pre-pickled, but I do know how to pickle things.
There you go. You'll have to make some and let me know how you like it.
I very well might someday. The issue is I don't know anybody who would want to eat it. So I'm gonna have to like buy a whole beef tongue
Hmm.
and then figure out what to do from there.
Could you air freight me the rest of it? It's been years since I had any.
I mean, that sounds possibly very illegal.
It probably is, yeah.
But no, that might be what ends up happening.
If someone wants to send me some delicious kosher beef tongue, yeah, I'll be all for it. If we ever have a PO box for this podcast, I can't imagine the stuff that would show up in it.
Yeah, this is how we no longer have a PO box if we ever get one, is by asking to be sent pickled meats.
Yeah. What could be wrong with that?
As delicious as they may be.
Yeah, I don't think the mail system enjoys handling them.
I really can't blame them at all for that. Yeah.
No, I suppose I can't in any reasonable way.
Now this is a strange one. Polish jellied tongue recipe.
Oh.
Jellied pork tongue. It's like halfway to aspic. That sounds much less good.
No, that doesn't sound good at all. Jellied tongue seems a bridge too far.
Cannot disagree. I mean, especially since like tongue is gonna have so much collagen that unless you're doing the whole thing where you boil it, dump out the water, do that again and again, it's gonna be kind of jellied anyway.
Right. It's sort of redundant.
Yeah.
Well, what can we really ask for from Poland?
I mean, it just the way that this recipe is written, it almost seems like it was meant to be anti-Semitic.
Oh, really?
Well, not this recipe, but like just the way it's framed as like a traditional Polish dish that's reminiscent of aspic. The jellied pork tongue recipe is made with pork or beef tongues and served cold.
Mm. Yeah, I suppose I can see what you're getting at there. There's something about my experience as a Jewish person that does lead to that does lead to questions or things like this. There's no way she's listening to this podcast, so I feel comfortable sharing this. But when I was in high school, I worked at an Office Max, and one of my coworkers, I didn't have a rewards account when I was an employee because why would I didn't care, and a lot of my coworkers did. And there was one time where one of my coworkers who was a little bit younger than me, I think I was the first Jewish person that she'd ever met, asked one of my other coworkers if the reason I didn't have a rewards account is because I was Jewish, which, which is something that I don't know if I'll ever really be able to understand.
No, that's
But
that's
it,
layers of weird
yeah,
presumption.
exactly. But it is that aspect of like that kind of innocent or benevolent like otherism of somebody of like I don't think that Topanga was meaning anything by it, but it was rather just confused why it was not like other people, and the only thing that she could immediately draw that to is the fact that I was also ethnically not like other people.
Yeah, that's a weird one.
It
Usually,
is a weird one.
usually, for a goy, I'm pretty good at unraveling the layers of those kinds of anti-Semitic remarks. But no, that one's weird.
Well, yeah, and the weird thing that I think the reason why it stumped me for so long is that you would think that the anti-Semitic remark to say would be like, doesn't she know that she can save money if she has a rewards account or something like that? But rather a rejection of the potential stream for a deal for yourself is, I think, the part of it that is very confusing to me.
Yeah, clearly she thinks that it must be a cabal of
Right.
Jews running the rewards program who are getting one over on her.
I have some kind of inside knowledge, and that's
Exactly.
why I don't have a rewards account.
You think you're saving money,
It's
but really it's a conspiracy.
all a conspiracy. There are multiple arcade bars in walking distance of my house, so I'll have to petition that they find a Hydro Thunder machine.
I mean, I'm a little surprised they wouldn't have it, although it is, those subwoofers can't be cheap.
Yeah, no, for some reason, there's always House of the Dead. There's always Time Crisis. Those are always like arcade staples. There's that
Mhm.
Alien game where you shoot the xenomorphs. That's always a pretty big arcade staple too. But for whatever reason, yeah, I've never been in one that has that.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of us are a little bit young for the true heyday of arcades.
Yeah, very true.
But at the movie theaters, some restaurants for some reason, yeah, absolutely played some Hydro Thunder in my day.
That was a thing in the 90s and early 2000s, is having arcade games in a restaurant.
Yeah, I mean, when everybody's going to Olive Garden or whatever equivalent had the arcade games,
Mhm.
you gotta have some entertainment for the kids, or they'll start to talk to each other.
Yeah, or in the case of my upbringing, when we were waiting at an Olive Garden for the better part of 2 hours, which as an adult is a crazy amount of time to wait for that quality of food. Um, we just
You
went
could
out and
just
played
make
in the
your own
parking
food.
lot. Yeah, yeah, I,
2 hours.
I know. I don't. I was with somebody else's family,
Hmm.
um, and Olive Garden was for some reason where their parents decided to take everybody, and yeah, it was like a 2 hour wait. They gave us free fried ravioli, and then eventually we went out to the parking lot to play around in the parking lot, and I watched the two brothers from this family hit each other with plastic swords in the parking lot for the better part of an hour.
Entertaining.
Yeah, it was. And then we sat down and had very subpar Italian food.
It's a family place.
It's a family place. Why else would that old Italian man have such a vivid memory of the old country and the commercials?
Oh, I forgot about those commercials.
Oh God,
What an
Olive
amazing
Garden.
thing.
Olive Garden really ruled America with an iron fist in the early 2000s.
I just feel bad for people who still go there, honestly,
Yeah.
because it's not even like reasonably priced. It's like
No,
20 bucks for overcooked pasta.
Yeah, none of it is. I think the last time I was at an Olive Garden, I tried to order wine, and they never gave it to me.
Oh my god.
Like, I just never got it.
So have you been to an Olive Garden in like the last 5 years?
Last 5 years? No, I don't think so.
So they now have like these little entertainment console things at the tables that you're like
What?
kind
Like
of
a
supposed
Buffalo
to.
Wild Wings?
I've never eaten in at a Buffalo Wild Wings, so maybe. But yeah, I imagine it's quite similar. They have like little arcade games that kids can play because apparently food isn't enough entertainment anymore with children these days.
Wow.
But also, yeah, you're supposed to order food on the same screen that your
Really?
kid is presumably being distracted by. Yeah, it is in a weird transitional point.
That is weird. Huh. Maybe
Olive
I'll have to
Garden.
go to an Olive Garden at some point just to check this out.
You don't even get the breadsticks anymore without
Really?
asking. It's crazy. I don't understand why anyone goes there.
That's really an example of capitalism run amok, is they don't give you breadsticks at Olive Garden anymore.
I mean, I do like the fact that you can equally say the unlimited breadsticks are capitalism run amok, and also the fact that they don't give you the unlimited breadsticks without you asking is an example of capitalism run amok. It's very nice that both of those are equally true.
It's almost like this is a really well-conceived system of organization for an economy.
Except that in this case, it's Olive Garden, so there's no way that any planning went into it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Did you hear that Red Lobster is being put out of business by the unlimited shrimp event they do once a year?
What I did hear about this. One has to ask though, why not simply stop giving away so many shrimp?
Well, apparently that's why people come. They're in this strange catch-22
It's a
where
death spiral of unlimited shrimp.
yeah, where they don't get enough people during the rest of the year to actually succeed as a restaurant, and when they do get people, it's during the unlimited shrimp thing, and it's so unprofitable for them that it's becoming a death spiral for Red Lobster.
I mean, and in that, the weird part of that is in that class of restaurants, Red Lobster is and always has been in my lifetime, like a head and shoulders above the rest of them in terms of actual
Yeah,
quality of food. So that's just
very much
really
so.
weird.
It is. Yeah.
Like,
Well, I mean, if overcooked pasta costs $20 at Olive Garden, I can't imagine what the average entree at Red Lobster costs now.
that's a good question. I haven't been there in well over 5 years, so I
Same.
don't know. Jeez. Oh no, American culture is dying.
Chain restaurants are dying out in America. Oh my god.
Guess we'll have to go back to filling mincemeat with whiskey and putting that on the counter.
There you go. We're coming back full circle now.